Hey there, tonight we're stepping into the blistering world of a medieval forge. Not the romanticized version you might envision, but a reality where the roar of flames and the relentless heat test every inch of resolve. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. You wake up to the sound of clanking metal and the smell of smoke so thick it could slap a dragon out of the sky. Welcome to the world of the medieval blacksmith, circa 1350. Your day starts before the sun even considers hitting the snooze button because the forge waits for no one, not even the rooster. Let's talk about your morning routine, which is more about survival than self-care. First, you'll need to shovel yesterday's ashes from the forge and start a new fire. Ever tried rubbing two sticks together? Well, here it's a matter of getting the bellows pumping, which is like the medieval version of CrossFit. Speaking of which, your breakfast is a quick affair, maybe some stale bread and ale if you're lucky. Coffee, not an option. You're running on pure grit and willpower. Now, before you romanticize this as some kind of noble medieval CrossFit, let's get real. Blacksmithing isn't all about crafting swords for gallant knights. Sure, you might get the occasional order for a broadsword, but your bread and butter are more pedestrian items. Horseshoes, nails, and agricultural tools are what keep you in business. Did you know that a single horseshoe could cost about a penny? That's right, a whole penny. Back then, a penny was worth a lot more than it is today. Think of it as a small investment in a horse's footwear. The economic landscape is as rugged as the land itself. Iron doesn't just fall from the sky, and you're not living in some magical realm where you can summon it with a flick of the wrist. That iron ore needs to be mined, smelted, and transported. You're looking at about a ton of iron costing around £3 sterling. In today's money, that's roughly $500, just for some metal that still needs a lot of work before it's anything useful. And don't even get me started on charcoal. That's right, the other black gold of the medieval era. You can't just pop down to the local medieval Home Depot and pick up a bag. You need a constant supply to keep that fire going, and it takes a lot of wood to make charcoal. It's a whole operation, chopping wood, stacking it, covering it with earth, and letting it smolder for days. This isn't just an exercise in patience, it's a test of your sanity. By the way, you're not just a social outcast hammering away in solitude. As a blacksmith, you're a key player in the village. The lord of the manor might own the land, but you're the one who makes the tools that keep the wheels of medieval life turning. This gives you a bit of social clout, although you're not exactly living in luxury. Your status is somewhere between the folks who grow the food and those who own the land. You're essential, but you're not exactly hanging out in the castle's great hall sipping mead with the nobles. The physical labor is staggering. Ever swung a hammer for 10 hours straight? Your arms would feel like they're filled with molten lead by the end of it. And this isn't just brute force, it's skilled labor. You're shaping metal with precision, using tools like hammers, anvils, and tongs. Each piece you create could be the difference between a bountiful harvest and a failed crop, a shod horse or a lame one. But let's not skip over the danger element. The forge is a fiery beast, and you're constantly at risk of burns, not to mention inhaling who knows what. Protective gear, not a chance. You might wrap some linen around your hands and hope for the best. And the soot. By the end of the day, you'll look more like a chimney sweep than a craftsman. While we're smashing myths, let's chat about the romantic idea of blacksmiths as the creators of legendary swords. Yes, great swords were forged, but your average day involves far less glamour. The truth is, most of your time is spent on the mundane. Fixing a plowshare, crafting nails, or shoeing a horse doesn't sound like the stuff of legends, but it's what keeps the village functioning. You're a vital cog in the medieval machine, even if you're not getting the glory. So, as you stoke the forge's fire and prepare for a day of muscle-burning, sweat-inducing labor, consider the broader picture. Your work supports the economy and helps maintain the social fabric of your community. You're not just a blacksmith, you're a cornerstone of medieval society. But make no mistake, it's a world of hard knocks and harder labor, far removed from the dreamy tales of chivalry and adventure. By the end of this grueling day, you'll have earned every coin that drops into your soot-stained palm. So, with soot on your brow and a sense of weary satisfaction in your bones, let's dive into the nuts and bolts, or should I say, the hammers and anvils, of medieval blacksmithing. If you're picturing a lone blacksmith banging away in solitude, think again. Blacksmiths were more like the foremen of a small, fiery team. It was practically a family affair with apprentices and journeymen underfoot, all working together like a well-oiled machine, or as close to one as you could get in the 14th century. Let's start with the tools of the trade. Your trusty hammer, an extension of your arm, could weigh anywhere from a couple of pounds to over 10, depending on what you're crafting. It's your best friend and your worst enemy, giving you the power to shape iron and the backache of a lifetime. The anvil is where the magic, or the blisters, happen. Weighing in at a hefty 100 pounds or more, this solid block of iron is more than just a backdrop for blacksmith movie montages. It's the stage where the drama of transformation plays out, from raw metal to functional masterpiece. And let's not forget the bellows. Think of them as the lungs of the forge, breathing life into the fire. These massive leather contraptions were the medieval equivalent of a turbocharger, pumping air to keep the fire hot enough to make iron malleable. Forget your fancy electric fans. This was all manpower, often provided by the younger apprentices, who probably felt more like human hamsters than aspiring craftsmen. Now, speaking of apprentices, here's where we blow the lid off another myth. The image of the solitary blacksmith pounding out an Excalibur in isolation is more fiction than fact. The reality was a bustling workshop filled with eager apprentices and experienced journeymen. Entering this world wasn't a casual decision. You didn't just stroll in one day and start hammering away. Becoming a blacksmith was a commitment akin to a medieval marriage. You'd start as an apprentice, and this wasn't a gig economy job you could pick up on a whim. Nope, you were in it for the long haul, up to 7 years, to be precise. And don't expect to be paid much, if at all. Your earnings were more in the form of knowledge and room and board. Room, of course, being a dusty corner of the workshop. Once you survived apprenticeship, you graduate to a journeyman. The term journeyman might sound like an epic wanderer, but in reality it meant you were on the move, yes, but more in search of work and experience than adventure. You travel from town to town, plying your trade and honing your skills. It was like the medieval version of networking, minus the LinkedIn profile. Only after years of proving your mettle, pun intended, could you hope to become a master blacksmith. And what about the guilds, those medieval trade unions with a touch of mystery and a dash of bureaucracy? Joining a guild wasn't just about knowing your way around a forge. It was about politics, connections, and let's be honest, a few bribes didn't hurt. Guilds controlled everything, from prices to quality standards, and they jealously guarded their secrets. You couldn't just open a shop and start selling your wares. You had to be a member, and membership was as exclusive as a medieval VIP club. Let's not ignore the environmental impact of all this forging. The forest wasn't just a fairy tale setting, but a resource, and blacksmiths were one of its biggest consumers. Charcoal production required vast amounts of wood, leading to deforestation long before it was a buzzword. Imagine the local villagers watching their beloved forest slowly disappear, one tree at a time, all for the sake of keeping the forges burning. Economically, the blacksmith was indispensable. The tools and items crafted in the forge supported the local economy, from plows that tilled the fields to nails that held together homes. But it wasn't all sunshine and horseshoes. The cost of iron and the constant demand for charcoal meant tight margins and pressure to produce. A blacksmith's life was a balancing act between supply and demand, with the ever-present threat of financial ruin looming like a dark cloud over the glowing embers. So, as you wipe the sweat from your brow and contemplate the day's work, remember, you're not just hammering metal. You're part of a legacy, a tradition that shaped the medieval world, even if it left you with a sore back and a longing for modern conveniences. Blacksmithing wasn't the heroic endeavor romanticized in tales, but it was vital, gritty, and far more communal than the lone figure at the anvil cliché. And as the sun sets on yet another day, you might find solace in knowing that, despite the grime and the grind, you're a key player in the medieval tapestry, albeit one with a pretty severe charcoal addiction. But let's pause for a moment and take a step back from the clang of hammers and the hiss of cooling metal. Instead, let's talk about what it really cost to be a medieval blacksmith beyond the price of iron and charcoal. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just your wallet that took a beating. You see, life as a blacksmith came with a whole set of health hazards that would make even the most hardened factory worker wince. First up, let's chat about your lungs. The forge was essentially a medieval smokehouse, and you were the brisket. All that charcoal smoke and metal fumes created an atmosphere that was less bucolic village scene and more post-apocalyptic smog fest. Respiratory issues were as common as the soot under your fingernails. Chronic bronchitis, known back then as the blacksmith's cough, was practically a job requirement, and let's not even start on the long-term effects. If you didn't keel over from lung problems by age 40, you were probably the local marvel, or maybe just too stubborn to quit. And burns, oh buddy, burns were practically a badge of honor. When you're dealing with molten metal, it's not a question of if you'll get burned, but when and how badly. Protective gear was, shall we say, minimalist. Think linen wraps and leather aprons. Not quite the high-tech safety gear you'd find on a modern construction site, but it was better than nothing, barely. You might have heard that blacksmiths were superhuman, immune to fire and heat. Well, reality check. They weren't. They just learned to live with the scars. Let's not forget the occasional but no less terrifying explosion. Forging isn't just hitting metal with a hammer. It's a delicate dance of temperatures and reactions. Get it wrong, and you might find yourself in the middle of an impromptu fireworks display, minus the oohs and ahs. It's a wonder more blacksmiths didn't end up with a few missing fingers or an early retirement in the form of a wooden leg. But beyond the physical toll, being a blacksmith also came with its fair share of social challenges. You'd think that being the town's go-to-metal maestro would earn you a bit of respect, right? Well, yes and no. While you might have had more clout than the average peasant, there was a certain air of suspicion that followed you around like a bad smell. See, metalworking had a touch of the mystical about it. To the superstitious medieval mind, turning raw metal into something useful might as well have been magic. This is where things get interesting. Because of this magic, blacksmiths were sometimes seen as having a foot in both the earthly and otherworldly realms. In some places, you could be seen as a necessary evil, respected for your skills, but also just a little bit feared. There were whispers of sorcery and witchcraft, and not the fun kind involving wands and potions. No, this was the let's grab some pitchforks and torches variety. In fact, some folklore suggested that blacksmiths could control the weather or had a direct line to the underworld. Can you imagine explaining that at the medieval equivalent of a PTA meeting? Being a blacksmith also meant you were at the center of town gossip. Everyone needed you, and everyone had an opinion about you. You were like the medieval Facebook, where everyone seemed to know what you were doing and probably had a few critiques to offer. If you were smart, you'd use this to your advantage, playing the village politics like a game of chess. But step on the wrong toes, and you could find yourself out of work faster than you could say anvil. Despite the challenges, blacksmiths were indispensable. You were the one who kept the plows plowing and the knights jousting. Your shop was a hub of activity, a place where people gathered not just for tools, but for news and gossip. You were a craftsman, a businessman, and occasionally a reluctant participant in the village drama. So, as you wipe the soot from your face and ponder the day's labor, remember, you're not just a craftsman. You're part of a complex tapestry of medieval life, a blend of skill and superstition, necessity and notoriety. And as the sun sets and the forge cools, you're left with the satisfaction of knowing that, despite the risks and the rumors, you're an irreplaceable piece of the medieval puzzle, smoke-stained lungs and all. With the forge cooling and the day's work etched into your muscles, it's time to shift gears from the clang of hammers to the clamor of swords and shields. You see, blacksmithing wasn't just about keeping the local farmers in plows and nails. It was the backbone of medieval warfare. When the trumpets of war sounded, the blacksmith's role in society shifted from village necessity to military linchpin. Forget the romanticized image of knights in shining armor charging gallantly into battle. Without a blacksmith, they'd be more like knights in shining disappointment. Wars and conflicts were as common as a medieval flea infestation, and with each skirmish, the demand for weapons and armor soared like the cost of concert tickets today. A lord's armory was only as good as its blacksmith, and this meant your workload ballooned from grueling to downright Herculean. Imagine being the medieval Amazon Prime, expected to deliver swords, maces, and chainmail without the luxury of 2-day shipping. Each suit of armor could take weeks to craft, requiring not just skill, but an intimate knowledge of metallurgy, which was the medieval equivalent of having a PhD in awesome. Speaking of metallurgy, let's talk about the blast furnace, a game changer that hit the scene in the late medieval period like a rock star at a sold-out concert. Before its introduction, the production of iron was a painstaking, labor-intensive process, yielding small quantities of bloom iron. But with the blast furnace, suddenly you could produce larger quantities of cast iron, increasing not just efficiency, but also the quality of the weapons and armor. It was like upgrading from a bicycle to a sports car. Imagine the power shift this caused in medieval society. Those who controlled the blast furnaces wielded significant influence, almost like holding the keys to a medieval missile silo. Now, let's get political. The blacksmith wasn't just another cog in the feudal machine. He was a critical component of a lord's military prowess. A well-equipped army could be the difference between expanding your territory and being overrun by your neighbors. Blacksmiths were secret weapons in this geopolitical chess game, their skills directly impacting the balance of power. A lord with a savvy blacksmith could field an army that resembled a porcupine bristling with steel quills, while others had to make do with blunt sticks. The political importance of blacksmiths extended beyond mere armament. They were custodians of military secrets, trusted with the designs of weapons that could tip the scales in battle. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of defense contractors, minus the corporate jets and scandalous headlines. Their work ensured that a lord's forces were not only armed, but also outfitted with the latest in medieval military tech. And in a time when battles were often won by the sharpness of your sword or the thickness of your armor, having a competent blacksmith was like having a strategic ace up your chainmail sleeve. Technological advancements brought about new challenges and opportunities. As warfare evolved, so did the weapons. Longbows, crossbows, and eventually firearms began to change the landscape of battle, and blacksmiths had to adapt or become obsolete. Imagine being a blacksmith when the crossbow came into vogue. Suddenly, you're not just making swords, but also crafting bolts and reinforcing armor to withstand these new projectiles. It was an arms race of iron and ingenuity. But let's not forget the economics of all this. Wars were expensive, and blacksmiths were right in the thick of it, juggling the demand for more weapons with the ever-present scarcity of resources. Iron was still costly, and maintaining a steady supply of charcoal was akin to keeping a small forest on retainer. Every arrowhead, every sword, was a testament to the delicate dance between supply and demand, and the blacksmith was the choreographer. As the sun set and the forge's glow faded, your place in society shifted once more. You weren't just a craftsman, you were a pivotal player in the power dynamics of your time. Your work armed the soldiers who defended the land, secured the fortunes of noble lords, and in many ways wrote the very history of the era. And while the knights got the glory, it was the blacksmiths who made sure they had something shiny to ride out with. So, as you close up shop and ponder the day's labor, consider the weight of the hammer in your hand, not just a tool, but a symbol of power and progress. The forge might be cooling, but your role in the world remains red hot, an indelible mark on the annals of history. As the night draws in, remember that while kings and lords may have ruled, it was the blacksmiths who armed them with the means to do so. As the night deepens and weary blacksmiths across the kingdom let their hammers rest, let's take a moment to explore how the craft's legacy has been shaped by the anvil's echo through time. You see, while medieval blacksmiths were the unsung heroes of their age, the Industrial Revolution was about to perform the ultimate disappearing act on traditional forges, swapping soot-stained artisans for shiny new machines that could churn out iron at a pace that would make any medieval craftsman drop his jaw, and perhaps his hammer, in disbelief. The late 18th century saw the rise of industrialization, where steam power and mechanization turned the blacksmith's work from an artisanal endeavor into a factory operation. The blast furnace, once a revolutionary game-changer, was now just a cog in a much larger machine. By the mid-1800, the Bessemer process for steel production had taken hold, drastically slashing the cost of steel, and in many ways hammering the final nail into the coffin of the small-town forge. Steel production soared from a few tons to millions annually. By 1875, Britain alone was producing about 375 0.000 tons of steel each year. Compare that to the painstaking process of medieval ironworking, and it's clear why traditional blacksmiths were left in the dust of progress. But let's not get too teary-eyed over the decline of the village blacksmith. While industrialization may have dimmed the forge's fire, it also sparked a new era of innovation. With mass-produced steel, railways crisscrossed continents, skyscrapers reached for the heavens, and bridges spanned mighty rivers. The world was literally being built with the fruits of this industrial boom. Yet, as machines took over, they left behind a nostalgia for the blacksmith's lost art, a yearning for the days when strength of arm and eye ruled the day. Fast forward to the 20th century, and you'll find that blacksmithing, once relegated to the annals of history, experienced a romantic revival. Fueled by a longing for craftsmanship in an age of mass production, artists and hobbyists began to reclaim the forge not just as a place of work, but as a symbol of artisanal integrity. The arts and crafts movement of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, championed by the likes of William Morris, sought to revive traditional handcrafts in response to the industrial age's soulless uniformity. Suddenly, the blacksmith was no longer a relic of the past, but a craftsman of the future, merging the ancient with the avant-garde. Today, blacksmithing enjoys a cultural renaissance, albeit with a more artistic twist. From backyard hobbyists to professional artisans, the craft has found a new life in creating bespoke knives, intricate sculptures, and even jewelry. The modern blacksmith isn't just forging plowshares or horseshoes, they're creating art. And let's not forget the burgeoning world of historical reenactments and Renaissance fairs, where you can find blacksmiths pounding away in full medieval regalia, bringing history to life with each clang of the hammer. It's as if the blacksmith has traded in his dusty corner of the medieval village for a spotlight on the cultural stage. Despite this revival, the myths and romanticized depictions of blacksmithing persist, often overshadowing the gritty reality of the craft. Popular media loves to portray blacksmiths as solitary figures, toiling away in isolation, as if they are medieval superheroes battling iron with sheer willpower. Shows like Forged in Fire have further glamorized the trade, letting viewers imagine themselves as modern-day Vulcans crafting legendary blades. But let's be real. While the image of a lone smith in a darkened forge may appeal to our sense of drama, it's far removed from the reality of burned fingers and smoke-filled lungs. The romantic appeal of blacksmithing is undeniable, but it's essential to remember the historical truths behind the craft. Blacksmiths were not just creators of legendary swords and mystical artifacts. They were laborers, businessmen, and occasionally scapegoats for societal superstitions. Their work was physically demanding, often dangerous, and at times downright thankless. Yet they were an integral part of the medieval economy and a cornerstone of their communities, wielding influence that extended beyond the forge. As we wrap up this journey through the life of a medieval blacksmith, it's worth reflecting on the duality of their legacy. One foot planted firmly in reality, the other in the realm of myth and nostalgia. It's a testament to the enduring power of craftsmanship and the human desire to find meaning in the work of our hands. So, the next time you see a piece of wrought iron or a hand-forged knife, spare a thought for the centuries of sweat, skill, and soot that have brought it to life. In the end, blacksmithing remains a symbol of resilience and creativity, a craft that has survived the flames of history to emerge anew in a modern world. While the clang of hammers may no longer echo through village squares, the spirit of the blacksmith lives on, a testament to an age when the fire of the forge was as vital as the fire in a blacksmith's heart. The legacy of blacksmiths is not just in the tools they made or the weapons they forged, but in their enduring place in the human story, a story that continues to inspire and ignite the imagination. In the windswept plains of Mesopotamia, somewhere around 4,500 BCE, a group of enterprising folks decided it was high time they stopped wandering the harsh landscape and set down roots. Literally, they took one look at the vast, muddy expanse between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, shrugged off the lack of beachfront property, and declared, "This'll do." Thus, the Sumerian city-states were born, transforming a patch of sun-baked real estate into the so-called cradle of civilization. Now, these early urbanites weren't just slapping together a few huts and calling it a day. Oh no, they took mud bricks, arguably the ancient world's equivalent of a Lego set, and constructed bustling cities like Uruk, and Eridu. If you're wondering what drew them to this seemingly unremarkable patch of dirt, the answer is simple: water. Lots of it, and in the form of the mighty Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These natural highways were a bit like the Wi-Fi of the ancient world, vital for survival, trade, and the occasional existential crisis when they decided to flood everything in sight. But the Sumerians weren't about to let a little water ruin their day. Instead, they harnessed it with some ingenious irrigation systems that would make even modern engineers nod in approval. By digging canals and ditches, they transformed unpredictable floodwaters into a steady stream of agricultural productivity. Suddenly, they had a surplus of food, which meant they could support a growing population, and more importantly, dedicate some people to pursuits other than just finding their next meal. Essentially, they kick-started an economic boom that saw the rise of specialized trades and crafts. The Sumerians were living the Mesopotamian dream, complete with artisanal goods and bustling bazaars. This economic upswing also laid the groundwork for some of the first forms of writing. You see, when you're trading a couple of bushels of barley for a sheep, you need a way to keep track of who owes what. Enter cuneiform, a wedge-shaped script etched into clay tablets. It wasn't exactly Shakespeare, but it got the job done. These records helped the Sumerians maintain order in their rapidly expanding city-states, which were beginning to resemble urban centers rather than glorified villages. Now, before we get too misty-eyed imagining a Sumerian utopia where everyone thrived in harmony, let's pump the brakes. Sure, the Sumerians were pioneers, but life wasn't all sun-dappled irrigation canals and thriving markets. For starters, they had to contend with the not-so-gentle whims of their environment. Floods could wipe out entire harvests, and droughts weren't exactly a picnic either. Plus, when you're the hardest civilization on the block, everyone wants a piece of the action, or more precisely, your resources. Conflict with neighboring regions was a frequent occurrence because, let's face it, who wouldn't want a slice of that fertile crescent? Politically, these city-states were a hotbed of power struggles, with rulers who'd make modern-day politicians look like amateurs. Kings were often seen as divine representatives, which sounds cool until you realize it also meant they could do pretty much whatever they pleased. It was a delicate balance of power and the occasional coup d'etat, ancient style. And while the Sumerians did give us some of the earliest examples of organized government, their system was less about democratic debate and more about whoever could wield the most influence, whether through wealth, military might, or divine right. Despite these challenges, the Sumerians left an indelible mark on history. They laid the foundations for urban societies and organized governance. They created a script that influenced languages for millennia. They showed that with a bit of ingenuity, you could turn a desolate patch of land into the heartbeat of a burgeoning civilization. But let's not pretend it was all part of some grand design. These were real people adapting to a harsh world, using whatever they had on hand, be it mud, water, or sheer determination. So, while the romanticized image of Sumer may paint it as a utopia of innovation and prosperity, the reality was a bit more complex. It was a place of creativity and conflict, of advancement and adversity. And that's what makes the Sumerian story so compelling. It's the tale of humanity's relentless quest to carve out a future, one mud brick at a time. And speaking of relentless quests, let's wade into the political soup that was Sumer. If you thought modern politics was messy, you haven't seen anything yet. Picture a landscape where kings, priests, and a few unfortunate scribes were tangled up in a constant game of who's got the power. The kings were the headliners, strutting around as if the gods themselves had anointed them. But it wasn't all divine right and ceremonial robes. It was a cutthroat business where the stakes were as high as the ziggurates they built. Take Gilgamesh, for instance. Yeah, the guy who's more famous for his epic than his actual reign. He was the kind of ruler whose PR would make Instagram influencers green with envy. We're talking about a king who might have lived around 2800 BCE in the city of Uruk, and whose tales were later immortalized in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, the epic paints him as part hero, part demigod, but reality probably involved a lot more paperwork and a lot less monster slaying. Yet, the stories about his quest for immortality and his bromance with Enkidu were not just entertainment. They were ancient Sumer's version of a blockbuster, capturing imaginations and reinforcing the king's divine credentials. But let's not get too carried away with the epic's romance. The actual governing of a city-state like Uruk was more likely a slog through administrative duties, tax collection, and the occasional public works project, not exactly material for a legendary tale. And while Gilgamesh was supposedly two-thirds god, the remaining one-third, the human part, had to deal with the very real challenges of leadership, including keeping those pesky neighboring city-states at bay. These city-states, each a mini-kingdom, were the Kardashians of the ancient world, constantly at each other's throats, vying for power, and occasionally forming alliances that lasted about as long as a celebrity marriage. You had Lagash, Kish, and others, each with its own king who thought he was the bee's knees. But behind every king was a priesthood that quietly pulled the strings. These priests were the original spin doctors, interpreters of divine will, and as such, wielded considerable influence. They were the ones who claimed the gods had a heartline to their temples, and if that's not a power play, I don't know what is. Economics and religion were as intertwined as a Sumerian mud brick. Temples weren't just places of worship. They were economic powerhouses, controlling vast tracts of land and labor. They employed scribes to keep track of all this wealth, recording transactions in cuneiform on clay tablets, and these scribes deserve a shout-out. After all, they were the unsung heroes who prevented a complete bureaucratic meltdown. Imagine being the poor soul who had to document every barley trade and sheep swap. No wonder they developed a script that looked like a bunch of tiny wedges. But with great power came great responsibility, or in the case of Sumer, great opportunity for corruption. Kings and priests occasionally found themselves at odds, each vying for control over resources and the hearts and minds of the populace. It was a delicate dance. Too much power in one camp could destabilize the whole city-state. Yet, the divine right of kings meant they often had the upper hand, able to claim that their grandiose building projects were all part of a celestial plan. The truth, probably more about showcasing their might and securing legacies than any divine decree. Amidst this political intrigue, dynastic disputes were as common as the summer floods. Succession wasn't always straightforward, and power struggles often erupted into full-blown conflicts. The throne could be passed down to a son, brother, or even a capable general, but it wasn't a system set in stone, more like set in clay, easily reshaped by force or cunning. A king's death was often followed by a scramble for power that could make Game of Thrones look like a tea party. And just when you thought you'd gotten the hang of Sumerian politics, enter the guards. Oh, the guards. They were as fickle as a cat with a new toy. Each city-state had its patron god, and the ruling king was often seen as their earthly representative. This divine endorsement was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it legitimized the king's rule. On the other, it meant that any calamity, whether a failed harvest or a military defeat, could be blamed on the king's failure to appease the gods. Talk about pressure. But here's the kicker. These divine interventions were as much about human politics as they were about celestial decrees. Claiming divine support was the ultimate trump card in any political squabble. If you could convince the populace that the gods were on your side, you'd not only win the argument, you'd secure your position at least until the next flood or famine. So, while the legends of Sumer paint a picture of larger-than-life heroes and divine destinies, the reality was far more down-to-earth. It was a world where political maneuvering, economic control, and occasional divine theatrics were the order of the day. The Sumerians may have been the first to write their history, but they also knew how to spin a good yarn, blurring the lines between fact and fiction in a way that resonates even now. And this was only the beginning. Sumer's legacy would ripple through history, shaping the civilizations that followed and leaving us to sift through the stories, myths, and realities of a world that was both familiar and utterly unique. As we delve deeper into the vibrant tapestry of Sumerian life, it's time to pivot from the grandiose to the grassroots. Sure, the kings and their divine antics grab the headlines, but what about the average Sumerian who wasn't busy interpreting divine whims or swinging swords? Let's zoom in on the people who really kept the whole show running, those unsung heroes, the laborers, artisans, and yes, even the bakers who made sure no one went home hungry. First up, the farmers. These folks were the backbone of Sumerian society, toiling in the fields from sunup to sundown, quite literally at the mercy of the elements. Imagine waking up each morning knowing that your day would be spent wrangling the Tigris and Euphrates' temperamental waters to eke out a living. It was a life of back-breaking labor, but don't underestimate the importance of their work. They fed the city-states and fueled the economy. Without their annual harvests, those ziggurates would have been nothing more than ambitious mud piles. Now, let's talk about the artisans, the creative dynamos who turned raw materials into treasures. These were the folks who took a lump of clay and produced something you might actually want on your mantle, if you had a mantle in 3000 BCE. Goldsmiths, weavers, and potters crafted everything from jewelry and textiles to everyday household wares. And these weren't just practical items, they were status symbols. If you were a Sumerian looking to impress your neighbors, you better have some killer pottery to show off. Artisans were the original trendsetters, and their goods were as much a part of the Sumerian identity as the mud bricks that held up their cities. But what of the women of Sumer? Well, their lives were a mixed bag. On one hand, women could own property, run businesses, and in some cases, even become priestesses, an impressive title that came with both power and prestige. On the other hand, their primary roles were still largely domestic. The legal codes, like those found in the Code of Ur-Nammu from around 2100 BCE, reveal a society where women had rights, but were also subject to the whims of patriarchal authority. It wasn't all bad news, though. Women ran taverns, worked as scribes, and even engaged in trade. So, while they might have been juggling laundry and child-rearing, they were also an integral part of the economic engine. Speaking of legal codes, the Sumerians were quite the sticklers for order. Their laws are among the oldest known, and they reveal a society obsessed with justice, or at least a version of it. Theft, murder, and property disputes all had their prescribed penalties, and while you might think it was an eye for an eye, it was more like a shekel for a sheep. These codes were as much about maintaining social order as they were about justice. They illustrate a society that, despite its divine pretenses, is grappling with very human issues. Now, onto the gastronomic delights of the Sumerian diet. If you think your avocado toast is the pinnacle of brunch sophistication, think again. For a Sumerian, barley was the grain of choice, versatile enough to make bread, beer, and even porridge. It was the ancient world's answer to quinoa, the staple that kept everyone from kings to commoners going. The Sumerians were the original foodies, concocting recipes that mixed grains with dates, honey, and various meats, creating a culinary scene that would make even modern chefs nod in appreciation. But let's not romanticize it too much. While the elite might have enjoyed elaborate meals, the average Sumerian diet was more functional than fanciful. Think less Michelin star, more survival mode. And yet, their ability to cultivate and prepare these foods speaks to a culture that understood the value of a good meal. After all, food was more than sustenance. It was a marker of identity and status, a way to connect with the divine and celebrate life's milestones. So, while the Sumerian city-states were literal and metaphorical powerhouses, it was the everyday people who kept the engines running. From the fields to the forges, they were the ones who navigated the complexities of Sumerian society, whose labor and creativity transformed the landscape into a cradle of civilization. It wasn't all glory and grandeur, but it was undoubtedly a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance. And as we continue to unspool the Sumerian saga, remember that behind every ziggurat and clay tablet were real people, living real lives, each with their own stories to tell. As we leave this chapter open, it's clear that Sumer was more than just a civilization of epic tales and towering structures. It was a vibrant community where the mundane intertwined with the extraordinary, shaping a legacy that would ripple through history. The next time you sip your barley-infused beverage or muse over your latest craft project, tip your hat to the Sumerians. They were doing it long before it was cool. But let's not get too comfortable with the image of the Sumerians as peaceful innovators lounging around their ziggurates, sipping barley brews, while they were busy inventing the wheel and writing cuneiform love letters, or tax records. To be more precise, they were also sharpening their swords. That's right, the so-called cradle of civilization was also the cradle of some rather intense military activity. Forget the idyllic scenes of wise old scribes and bustling markets. Sumer was also the scene of some serious skirmishes that make the phrase, game of mudslides, suddenly seem very apt. First, let's roll back to that revolutionary wheel. Invented around 3500 BCE, this wasn't just a roundabout way to move things. The Sumerians turned what was essentially a wooden disc into a multi-purpose wonder. Initially used for pottery, someone soon realized it could revolutionize transportation. And from there, it was just a short, bumpy ride to the battlefield. The wheel became the secret weapon of Sumerian chariots, transforming their military capabilities. Now, you might think of chariots as sleek, Ben-Hur-style contraptions, but in reality, these were more like the battle tanks of the time, minus the cannons, and with a significantly higher mud quotient. But chariots weren't the only thing rolling into battle. The Sumerians had a knack for military innovation that went beyond mere wheels. They developed composite bows that could launch arrows with enough force to make even the bravest foe reconsider their life choices. They also armored up, crafting helmets and shields that offered some protection against the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Or, the neighbor from Lagash. Speaking of neighbors, the Sumerians weren't exactly the love thy neighbor type. Their city-states were frequently at war with each other, vying for control of the fertile land and valuable resources. Forget United Nations-style peace talks. This was more like a perpetual schoolyard brawl, with each city-state eager to prove its dominance. And while the idea of Sumer as a harmonious, peaceful society is appealing, the reality was far more gritty. It was a world where diplomacy was often conducted at spear point, and alliances were as fleeting as the Tigris in flood season. Now, you might be wondering, was all this fighting worth it? Well, from an economic perspective, the spoils of war were significant. Control of fertile land meant control of agricultural output, which in turn meant economic power. The victorious city-state could impose tributes on their defeated foes, swelling their coffers and allowing them to fund further military campaigns or grandiose building projects. It was a vicious cycle of conquest and consolidation, with each city-state striving to outdo the others. But let's not get too cynical. There was a certain romance to the Sumerian way of war. If you're the kind of person who finds mud, blood, and intrigue romantic, that is. The Sumerian kings often portrayed their military exploits as divinely sanctioned missions, with the gods themselves guiding their chariots. This not only legitimized their conquests, but also reinforced their status as demigods among men. It was a clever bit of PR, turning what was essentially a land grab into a celestial crusade. And while we're on the topic of divine interventions, let's not forget that Sumerian warfare was as much about psychological tactics as physical ones. The city-states would erect monumental statues and ziggurats not just as places of worship, but as symbols of their might and divine favor. These towering structures served as a constant reminder to friend and foe alike that the gods were watching, and they had a favorite. Yet, despite all the military might and divine posturing, the Sumerians were not invincible. Their constant infighting ultimately left them vulnerable to external threats. Enter the Akkadians, led by Sargon the Great, who decided around 2334 BCE that it was time to unify the warring city-states under his rule. Sargon's empire stretched across Mesopotamia, and while the Sumerians might have resented the Akkadian yoke, they couldn't deny the efficiency of a centralized administration. It was the beginning of the end for the independent city-states, but it also marked the start of a new chapter in Mesopotamian history. So, while the Sumerians may not have been the peaceful, harmonious society we sometimes imagine, they were undoubtedly pioneers in the art of warfare. They laid the groundwork for future empires, blending innovation with brutality and leaving a legacy that would shape the course of history. And as we continue to explore the rise and fall of these ancient city-states, we're reminded that history is never as simple as it seems. It's a messy, complex tale of ambition and innovation, of war and peace, written in the mud of a long-forgotten land. And so, we find the Sumerians at the crossroads of history, a fading civilization marked by innovation and internecine conflict. Their decline, like an ancient soap opera, was as dramatic as their rise. Following the Akkadian conquest, the Sumerian city-states gradually lost their individual identities, morphing into components of larger empires like the Babylonian and Assyrian. By around 2000 BCE, the Sumerians as a distinct cultural entity had essentially vanished into the annals of history, starting a trend that would make archaeologists' future lives both frustrating and fascinating. Now, why did these city-states fall apart after centuries of thriving? Well, it's the age-old cocktail of internal strife, resource depletion, and external pressure. Picture this: a cacophony of political infighting, environmental challenges, and the relentless advance of more unified cultures knocking at their mud-brick walls. The once mighty Sumerians, whose ingenuity had turned rivers into highways and mud into metropolises, found themselves overwhelmed by more cohesive forces. It's a bit like watching a local band get overshadowed by a slick corporate-backed pop star. Heartbreaking, but inevitable. But before we get too weepy over their demise, let's talk about the legacy these ancient innovators left behind. If you're wearing a watch, or even just glancing at your smartphone clock, you owe a nod to the Sumerians. These guys were obsessed with time, dividing it into units that still govern our lives today. They gave us the 60-minute hour and the 60-second minute, using a base 60 number system. Why base 60? Probably because it's easily divisible by a lot of numbers. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. Handy for trade, calendars, and as it turns out, modern mathematics. So next time you're counting down the minutes at work, remember the Sumerians have got you covered. And let's not forget the written word. Their cuneiform script laid a foundation for subsequent writing systems, influencing everything from Akkadian to the scripts of ancient Persia. Those little wedge-shaped marks on clay tablets might not look like much, but they were the tweets of their day, short, to the point, and often about grain or goats. This was more than just record-keeping. It was a fundamental shift in human communication. Writing allowed societies to pass down knowledge across generations, paving the way for everything from love letters to legal codes. In a way, the Sumerians invented not just writing, but the very idea of history itself. Economically, the Sumerians were the proto-bankers of Mesopotamia. Their agricultural surplus fostered trade networks that stretched from Anatolia to the Indus Valley. And while they might not have had Bitcoin, they did lay the groundwork for complex economies, with goods, services, and even labor being traded like stocks on the NYSE. They were the first to dabble in proto-capitalism, setting a precedent for the market-driven world we know today. You could say they were the original sharks in the ancient world's version of Shark Tank, minus the snappy suits. Of course, we can't ignore the rather romantic notion of Sumer as the birthplace of civilization. While it's true they weren't the only ones laying claim to that title, Egyptians and Indus Valley peoples might have a word or two. They were certainly among the first to define what a complex society could look like. From ziggurats to irrigation systems, they demonstrated that human ingenuity could transform the harshest environments into thriving hubs of culture and commerce. And let's face it, any society that could invent the wheel, beer, and poetry deserves a spot in the Civilization Hall of Fame. But let's not delude ourselves with nostalgia. The Sumerian legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of both brilliance and brutality. Their achievements in governance, technology, and culture were matched by their propensity for war and conquest. They were pioneers in both the arts of peace and the craft of war, demonstrating that civilization is often a double-edged sword. They remind us that progress and conflict frequently walk hand in hand, a paradox that has echoed through the ages. So, as we wrap up this journey through the rise and fall of the Sumerian city-states, let's tip our hats to these ancient innovators. Their story is not just one of ancient bricks and forgotten gods, but of human ambition and resilience. They paved the way for future civilizations, shaping the world one clay tablet at a time. In the end, the Sumerians teach us that history is a complex dance of chaos and creation, a reminder of our shared human endeavor to carve meaning out of the clay of existence. And with that, let's close the chapter on Sumer, knowing that while their cities may have crumbled, their legacy is etched into the fabric of our daily lives, whether we realize it or not. You wake up in ancient Rome, and it's not quite the cinematic epic you might expect. No golden chariots waiting outside, just the muffled clatter of hooves on cobblestones and the chatter of street vendors. Your day kicks off in the dim light of dawn, a time when most of the city is already bustling. Forget snooze buttons. The sounds of life beyond your unglazed window announce the start of your day. First things first, you shuffle over to the communal latrine, an experience that's as much a social moment as a biological necessity. It's a veritable Roman Twitter, where gossip flows faster than the Tiber. Here, you might overhear everything from the latest senatorial scandal to which gladiator is the talk of the arena. And yes, the sponge-on-a-stick situation is real, your ancient equivalent to a roll of charmin. You've got your sponge, they've got theirs, all sharing the same vinegar bucket. Hygiene was a group effort, after a quick breakfast of bread dipped in wine. Because apparently, the Romans were on to day drinking before brunch was cool. You hit the streets. You're heading to the public baths, a staple of Roman daily life. To get there, you navigate through a labyrinth of narrow streets lined with insulae, the multi-storied apartment buildings that most Romans called home. These structures are as precarious as they are cramped, often 2 or 3 stories high, and swaying slightly in the wind. And if you're wondering about the smell, let's just say the sanitation department here hasn't quite caught up with modern standards. Rome, in all its glory, is a cacophony of sounds and smells. The air is thick with dust, and the aroma of freshly baked bread, mixed with the less pleasant scent of the Tiber, which serves as a convenient dumping ground for the city's waste. But who needs rose-colored glasses when you've got the charm of authenticity? Arriving at the baths, you prepare to part with a quarter sestertius. That's the cover charge for an adult. Kids get in for a mere half quadrans. It's the ancient equivalent of a budget gym membership, except instead of treadmills, you've got a whole lot of naked Romans. The public baths are more than just a place to get clean. They're the social hubs of the empire. Picture a modern-day Starbucks crossed with a spa, where businessmen discuss politics and philosophers ponder the meaning of life, all while scrubbing off the grime of the city. But before you dive in, let's debunk a myth: Romans bathing in luxury. Sure, the baths are elaborate, with their mosaics and marble columns, but it's hardly a private retreat. The reality is a bustling communal space, echoing with laughter, arguments, and the occasional off-key singing. The tepidarium, or warm room, is where you start, easing into the bathhouse life. You're joined by everyone from senators to slaves, all equals in nudity, if not in status. The routine moves you next to the caldarium, the heart room, where the steam wraps around you like a suffocating Roman toga. This is where you sweat out your sins, or at least the sins of last night's bacchanalia. Then it's on to the frigidarium, the cold plunge that sharks the senses and gets the blood pumping. It's a cycle of extremes that Romans swear by for health and vitality. While you're in the baths, attendants offer to scrape the dirt off your skin with a strigil, a curved metal tool that's more medieval torture device than beauty product. You might even indulge in a massage with oil that smells faintly of olive and something you can't quite place, perhaps hopes and dreams. So, if you're thinking the Romans were all about decadent luxury, think again. The baths are less about indulgence and more about necessity and community. They are the original social network, long before Zuckerberg's time, where every strata of society comes together in a heady mix of steam, sweat, and conversation. And yet, as you soak and socialize, you can't help but marvel at the ingenuity of Roman engineering. The aqueducts, those magnificent stone arches that snake across the landscape, bring water from the distant hills, powering the baths and sustaining the city. It's a feat of infrastructure that would make even today's civil engineers weep with envy. As the day goes on, you'll learn that these baths are more than a place to cleanse the body. They are a reflection of Roman society itself, complex, communal, and not quite as glamorous as the movies would have you believe. But for now, you relax, basking in the warmth and the knowledge that here, in the heart of the empire, life is as much about the company you keep as the cleanliness you achieve. As you emerge from the steamy embrace of the Roman baths, feeling cleaner than a freshly minted denarius, it's time to refuel. Now, you might expect a Roman breakfast to be a lavish affair, piled high with exotic fruits and roasted peacock, but here's where reality slaps the myth across the face. The typical Roman breakfast, asterisk intaculum asterisk, if you want to impress your friends with some Latin, is as understated as a toga party without the togas. We're talking bread, maybe some cheese, and if you're feeling particularly indulgent, a drizzle of honey. Throw in a sip of watered-down wine, and voila, you're breakfasting like a plebeian king. Sure, the stereotype of Romans feasting on stuffed dormice and flamingo tongues exists, but such culinary extravagance was reserved for the 1%, the emperors and their entourage, not your average toga-wearing Joe. For most Romans, meals were about sustenance, not spectacle. Bread was the cornerstone of the diet, so much so that the average Roman citizen consumed around 2 pounds of the stuff every day. That's about the weight of a modern laptop, which, let's be honest, is the only thing most of us consume daily. And if you were lucky enough to snag an olive or two, you were living the high life. With breakfast in your belly, you set off for the beating heart of Rome, the Forum. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of Times Square, Wall Street, and the local coffee shop, all rolled into one bustling, chaotic hub. This is where Rome's pulse quickens, where commerce, politics, and the occasional scandalous rumor collide in a glorious cacophony. It's a space where senators rub shoulders with street vendors, and everyone's got an agenda. The Forum, sprawling over 200 by 150 meters, played host to a dizzying array of activities. You've got your temples and basilicas, sure, but let's focus on what really matters, the people. Traders hawking their goods, from garum, that fish sauce everybody loved, to the finest silks brought over the Silk Road. And speaking of commerce, here's a fun fact. A slave in Rome might set you back about 500 denarii, roughly the price of a mid-range laptop today. It's a stark reminder of the stark economic realities that the Forum embodied. As you wander through the throng, you might overhear a debate in the Senate House or catch sight of a trial in progress at the Basilica Julia. The Forum was more than just a marketplace. It was a crucible of power and politics. Here, laws were debated, alliances forged, and reputations made or broken. The famed orator Cicero once held court here, his words echoing off the marble columns as he navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics. But politics wasn't the only game in town. The Forum was also a hotbed of gossip, the ancient Twitter feed, if you will. Need to know who's been exiled, who's in Caesar's good graces, or who's been caught with their toga down. The Forum's your go-to source for all things juicy and scandalous. And let's not forget the hustlers and hucksters, each with a pitch as polished as a Roman mosaic. You could buy anything from a fresh tunic to a dubious cure-all, the latter often hawked by a quack promising to cure everything from gout to heartbreak. So, while the grandeur of the Forum might inspire visions of marble and majesty, it's the people, their ambitions, their rivalries, their sheer vitality, that truly defined this space. It was a place where the mundane and the monumental coexisted, where the echoes of history were punctuated by the everyday hustle of life. And as you weave through the crowd, you're not just a bystander to history. You're part of the grand tapestry that is Rome. In this ancient metropolis, the Forum stands as a testament to the complexities of Roman society, a place where the lines between legend and reality blur. So next time someone waxes poetic about the grandeur of Rome, remember, behind every marble column lies the grit and grind of everyday life, a reality as layered and intricate as the city itself. As the sights and sounds of the Forum fade into the background, you head towards the next stop on your Roman itinerary, a visit to the Colosseum. Ah, the Colosseum, the grand amphitheater that's become the poster child for ancient Rome. But before you get swept up in its iconic silhouette, let's dig a bit deeper, shall we? This architectural marvel could seat upwards of 50,000 spectators, all packed in tighter than sardines in a Roman garum jar. And while the grandeur is undeniable, let's not forget what drew the crowds. Blood, guts, and a whole lot of spectacle. You've probably heard tales of gladiators, those chiseled, sword-wielding warriors who battled for glory and freedom. Though let's be real, for many, freedom was as elusive as a sober senator at a bacchanalia. Gladiators were often slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals, with their lives dictated by the whims of the crowd. And what a crowd they were. These Romans were the ultimate thrill-seekers, cheering for blood like it was the latest blockbuster, complete with brutal special effects. Now, here's a tidbit to chew on. While the Hollywood version of a gladiator fight is all slow-motion drama and noble sacrifice, the reality was more about survival and spectacle. Victors could become celebrities, sometimes earning their freedom and the adoration of fans. But for many, the sands of the arena were their final resting place. And if you're wondering about the odds, let's just say the house always wins. The games were as much about power and control as they were about entertainment, with emperors using them as a tool to curry favor with the populace. Nothing says, "I'm one of you," like throwing a few exotic beasts into the mix, after all. Speaking of exotic, the Colosseum wasn't just about man-on-man action. Oh no, they spiced things up with venations, or wild beast hunts, featuring everything from lions to crocodiles. Picture this. The floor of the arena transformed into a miniature forest or desert, complete with live foliage and sand. It was like a National Geographic special, with a lot more screaming and a lot less conservation. And if you think your local zoo is pricey, consider this. A single lion could set back a Roman sponsor by 500 denarii, which is a lot of coin to spend on a creature better known for its roar than its ROI. But let's move on from the public spectacle to something a bit more intimate, visiting a Roman friend's house. Now, when you think Roman home, you might envision sprawling villas with frescoed walls and lush gardens. And sure, the elite had their palatial domus, complete with atriums and impluviums that could leave an impression stronger than a Caesar's edict. These architectural wonders were the epitome of Roman luxury, designed to impress visitors and flaunt wealth. But here's the catch. These homes were the exception, not the rule. For most Romans, especially in the bustling city, a domus was as attainable as a unicorn. The majority lived in insulae, the ancient equivalent of apartment complexes. Imagine multi-storied buildings where the upper floors were cheaper due to a distinct lack of elevators. And while these insulae housed Rome's vibrant working class, they were also fire hazards waiting to happen. Made of wood and mud brick, they were prone to collapse faster than a Roman under the weight of their own hubris. In these cramped quarters, privacy was a luxury few could afford. Families shared small rooms, with cooking done over open flames, a risky endeavor given the flammable nature of their surroundings. It's a miracle Rome didn't burn to the ground more often, though the Great Fire of 64 AD did give it a good try. And speaking of miracles, the rent for these insulae was as steep as the stairs to the top floor. It's a reminder that while the empire was grand, the everyday life of a Roman could be anything but let's not get too cynical. Rome wasn't just a city of contrasts. It was a city of innovation and resilience. Take, for example, their ingenious use of space in the domus. The atrium wasn't just a showpiece. It was a clever way to collect rainwater, funneled into a cistern below. And the peristyle garden, a slice of nature within the urban sprawl, offered a tranquil escape from the chaos of the streets. These homes were more than bricks and mortar. They were a testament to Roman adaptability and style. As you wrap up your visit, consider this. The life of a Roman was as varied as the empire itself, a blend of opulence and austerity, spectacle and simplicity. Whether in the roar of the Colosseum or the quiet of a modest insula, the essence of Rome was in its people, their dreams, their struggles, and their enduring spirit. And so, as the sun begins its slow descent over the eternal city, you find yourself at the cusp of an evening filled with promise and possibility. There's more to explore, more stories to uncover in this living tapestry of history. But for now, you take a breath, savoring the moment, knowing that the story of Rome is far from over. As the sun dips towards the horizon, casting a warm glow over the eternal city, you find yourself drawn to the bustling markets of Rome. It's here, amidst the clamor of haggling and the fragrant assault of spices, that you truly grasp the pulse of this sprawling metropolis. Forget the grandeur of the Colosseum or the philosophical debates of the Forum. This is where the real action happens. Welcome to the Roman marketplace, where the empire's vast trade networks converge in a glorious cacophony of commerce. Picture this. Stalls teetering under the weight of exotic goods from every corner of the empire, from Egyptian linen finer than a senator's toga, to spices from the distant east that could make even the blandest Roman fare sing. The sheer variety on display is enough to make your head spin faster than a politician caught in a scandal. And the best part, it's all available for the right price, or at least for whatever you can barter it down to. Now, you might assume that the Romans, in their quest for decadence, would be all about luxury shopping. And sure, the aristocrats might splurge on a Tyrian purple-dyed tunic, a color so exclusive it was practically reserved for the emperor himself. But let's not get carried away. For the average Roman, shopping was more about necessity than indulgence. A simple tunic might set you back around 15 denarii, a significant chunk of change when you consider that a legionary's daily wage was about a denarius. That's your entire paycheck on a single piece of clothing. Talk about a wardrobe investment. Speaking of fashion, let's dive into the sartorial world of Rome. The toga, that quintessential Roman garment, was more than just a piece of fabric. It was a statement. Draping yourself in a toga was like flashing a VIP badge at an exclusive club. Reserved for citizens, it was a mark of status, a symbol of Roman virtue. But let's be honest, wearing a toga was about as practical as wearing a duvet to a dinner party. It was cumbersome, required constant adjustment, and was as comfortable as a bed of nails. Yet, despite its impracticality, the toga was the height of Roman fashion. Wealthier Romans might own a collection of togas for different occasions, each more elaborate than the last. And if you were really looking to impress, you'd opt for a toga praetexta, bordered with purple, signaling your political clout or priestly status. But here's the kicker. The maintenance was a nightmare. Cleaning a toga involved fuller's earth and urine, a combination that would make even the most dedicated fashionista balk. But enough about clothes. Let's talk trade. The Roman market was a testament to the empire's reach, a melting pot of commerce that brought the world to Rome's doorstep. From the amber of the Baltics to the pearls of the Persian Gulf, the goods on offer reflected the vastness of Roman influence. It's a vivid reminder that while Rome might have been the center of the universe, it relied heavily on the peripheries to sustain its lavish lifestyle. Yet, here's where the myth of Roman abundance starts to unravel. While the elites might have reveled in imported delicacies and silks, the average Roman's diet was more modest. Bread, olives, and wine, preferably the cheap stuff, formed the backbone of daily sustenance. And while the marketplace offered a tantalizing array of produce, most of it was beyond the reach of the common citizen. In fact, grain was so crucial to the Roman diet that the state distributed it for free or at subsidized rates, a policy known as *cura annani*. It was a clever strategy, ensuring the populace stayed fed, and more importantly, content. But let's not romanticize it. The markets were as much about survival as they were about spectacle. Vendors cried out their wares, each more desperate than the last to make a sale. Bargaining was an art form, and if you weren't careful, a simple transaction could quickly turn into a scene from a Roman comedy. And as you navigate this vibrant chaos, you begin to understand the realities of Roman life, an existence as much about endurance as it was about elegance. As the sun sets and the market stalls begin to close, you catch sight of a merchant packing away his unsold goods, a poignant reminder that even in the heart of the empire, prosperity was not guaranteed. For every wealthy patrician dripping in jewels, there were countless plebeians scraping by, their lives dictated by the whims of the market and the caprices of fate. And so, as you leave the market behind, the echoes of commerce still ringing in your ears, you're left pondering the complexities of Roman society. The marketplace, with its vibrant tapestry of goods and people, is a microcosm of the empire itself, a blend of opulence and austerity, hope and hardship. It's a place where dreams are born and dashed in equal measure, a testament to the enduring spirit of a people who carved out a civilization from the dust of history. As you move on, the story of Rome continues to unfold, each chapter more compelling than the last. But for now, you carry with you the sights, sounds, and smells of the market, a vivid snapshot of life in the heart of the ancient world. And with that, you're ready to see what else this remarkable city has in store. Stay tuned. There's more to come, and the best is yet to be revealed. As you leave the market behind, satisfied with a day well spent amidst the hustle and vibrancy of Roman life, your evening awaits. A Roman dinner party, or *Sina*, the pinnacle of social engagements in this ancient world. Now, if you think of a dinner party as just a casual get-together with friends, think again. In Rome, a *Sina* is a theatrical event, more staged than a soap opera, where food and status are the main acts. The Roman *Sina* is not just about satisfying hunger, it's a meticulous display of wealth and connections. You've been invited to a domus, the kind of house that screams, "I'm important," with its grand atrium and elaborate frescoes. Picture a sprawling estate where each room is more ornate than the last, and you're getting close. The host, a Roman of considerable means, has spared no expense. The aim, to impress guests and remind them of their social inferiority. Subtlety, it seems, is not a Roman virtue. As you step inside, you're greeted by a flurry of activity. Slaves whisk around, attending to every need, from pouring wine to adjusting the cushions on the *triclinium*, the three-sided couch arrangement where diners recline. Reclining, by the way, isn't just for comfort, it's a status symbol. If you're lying down while eating, you're living the high life. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room, the slaves. They're the invisible hands making the magic happen, and their labor is as crucial to the success of the evening as the food itself. The dinner kicks off with the gusttatio or appetizers, where you might find yourself nibbling on olives, eggs, and oysters. It's the culinary equivalent of a warm-up act, setting the stage for the main event. The centerpiece of the cena is the prima mensa where dishes like roasted meats and fresh fish take center stage. Here, culinary extravagance knows no bounds, with delicacies like peacock and dormice stuffed with nuts making appearances. And let's not forget the wine, flowing as freely as political rumors in the forum. It's diluted, of course. Romans frowned upon drinking it neat, considering it barbaric. And while the idea of sipping watered-down wine might sound like a buskill, it's all about the long game here. The evening is young, and there's much conversation to be had. As the food courses through the evening, so too does the conversation. The dinner party is as much about intellectual exchange as it is about indulgence. Topics range from politics to philosophy, with the occasional dirty joke thrown in for good measure. Don't expect the host to shy away from controversial topics either. A lively debate is the hallmark of a successful gathering. And if you think today's dinner parties are competitive, the Romans have you beat. Here, conversation is a contact sport where wit and rhetoric are wielded like gladiatorial weapons. Music and entertainment also play a vital role, with performers, poets, and musicians adding to the ambience. If you're lucky, you might witness an elaborate performance involving acrobatics or even an impromptu play. It's the ancient precursor to dinner theater, minus the obligatory sing-along. And as you take it all in, you can't help but marvel at the intricate dance of society on display. The cena is a microcosm of Roman life, structured, hierarchical, and teetering on the edge of excess. But let's not get too swept up in the grandeur. Behind the veil of opulence lies a society built on stark inequalities. While the elite dine in luxury, the average Roman is more likely to end their day with a bowl of porridge than a banquet. The cena is a performance, a carefully curated illusion of harmony and abundance. Yet, it's also a reminder of the social stratification that defines Roman life. The slaves serving tonight's feast will return to their cramped quarters, and the leftovers from this lavish spread will likely be their meal for the next day. As the evening winds down and the guests begin to depart, you're left pondering the complexities of Roman identity. The cena is more than just a meal. It's a reflection of the values and contradictions of a civilization. It's a blend of sophistication and savagery, intellect and indulgence. And as you step back into the night, the cool Roman air a welcome contrast to the evening's warmth, you're struck by the enduring legacy of these ancient customs. The end of the day in Rome brings with it a sense of ritual and reflection. As the city quiets, the echoes of the day's events linger. Romans believed in the power of sacramentum or sacred oath, and as you retire, you can't help but feel the weight of history around you. The rituals of the day, from the bustling markets to the grand cena speak to a society deeply rooted in tradition, yet always on the cusp of change. Before you drift off to sleep, consider this. The Romans, for all their contradictions, have left an indelible mark on the world. Their innovations in architecture, governance, and culture continue to influence us today. And while the empire may have crumbled, the spirit of Rome endures, a testament to the resilience of human ambition and creativity. So as you close your eyes, let the stories of this ancient city lull you into dreams of grandeur and grit, of triumphs and tribulations. For in the heart of Rome, past and present intertwine, creating a tapestry as rich and complex as the civilization itself. And with that, your day in the life of a Roman citizen comes to a close, leaving you with a newfound appreciation for the legacy of this remarkable empire. Sweet dreams, or as the Romans might say, dulcis somnia . Galileo Galilei entered the world in Pisa on February 15, 1564, like a man destined to shake the universe with a telescope and a very tall building. Born under the shadow of the Leaning Tower itself, Galileo's early years were more about avoiding falling objects than dropping them from great heights. His father, Vincenzo Galilei, was a musician and music theorist who might have preferred his son to stick to scales and arpeggios instead of celestial bodies and mathematical formulas. But sons rarely follow the script their parents write, and Galileo was all about rewriting the rulebook, sometimes quite literally. Fast forward a few years, and young Galileo found himself at the University of Pisa. His father had nudged him towards medicine, probably imagining a future filled with stability and a steady paycheck. But if there's one thing we know about Galileo, it's that he didn't do steady. He tackled medicine with the same enthusiasm a cat shows for water, brief curiosity followed by a quick retreat. It wasn't long before mathematics caught his eye, and Galileo realized numbers made far more sense than humors and leeches. This was the Renaissance, after all, a time when the world was rediscovering the joys of logic and reason. So, Galileo did what any sensible Renaissance man would do. He swapped the scalpel for the compass and never looked back. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before Galileo was the icon of scientific revolution, he was a student with a penchant for tinkering. His first notable invention, the hydrostatic balance, was born from his fascination with measuring things, specifically the weight of objects in water. Now, this might not sound like the stuff of legends, but for Galileo, it was the beginning of a lifelong quest to understand the universe through observation and experimentation. The hydrostatic balance wasn't just a tool, it was a statement. It said, "Hey, the world is measurable, and I'm going to measure it." Galileo's knack for dropping things, both metaphorically and literally, was perhaps most famously illustrated by his alleged experiments from the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Legend has it that he dropped 2 spheres of different masses from the top of the tower to demonstrate that their rate of descent was independent of their weight, a direct challenge to Aristotelian physics. Now, whether this actually happened is as debatable as the existence of unicorns, but it makes for a great story. And isn't that half the fun of history? The myth says Galileo gathered a crowd, dropped the spheres, and watched them hit the ground simultaneously, proving that the old Greek had gotten it wrong. But hold on tight, because here's where we take a detour from the romanticized narrative. The truth is, there's no concrete evidence that this dramatic demonstration ever took place. Galileo himself never mentioned it in his writings. It was his student, Vincenzo Viviani, who spun this tale after Galileo's death. The reality is, Galileo probably conducted his experiments more discreetly, using inclined planes and careful measurements rather than grand public displays. It's like discovering your favorite magician does card tricks close to the chest instead of sawing assistants in half on stage. Despite, or perhaps because of, his rebellious streak, Galileo got himself noticed. He was appointed to the chair of mathematics at the University of Pisa in 1589, at the tender age of 25. It was here that he began to develop his theories on motion, laying the groundwork for what would later become classical mechanics. But academia was no safe haven. Galileo's ideas often put him at odds with colleagues who clung to traditional views like a barnacle to the hull of a ship. This friction led to a not-so-subtle nudge out of Pisa and into a new position at the University of Padua in 1592, where he would teach for 18 years. Padua was a hotbed of intellectual activity, and Galileo thrived in its lively atmosphere. His lectures drew students from all over Europe, eager to learn from the man who was challenging the status quo with every class. It was here that Galileo's curiosity led him to study everything from the stars in the sky to the speed of falling bodies and the swinging of pendulums. Yet, it wasn't just his academic endeavors that kept him busy. Galileo was a man of many talents, and sometimes those talents turned to more earthly concerns, like money. You see, being a university professor in the late 16th century wasn't exactly a ticket to wealth. Galileo supplemented his income with private tutoring and by selling instruments of his own design. He invented a military compass that became quite the hit with artillery officers, allowing them to calculate the optimal angle for firing cannonballs, because nothing says Renaissance man like combining mathematics with the art of war. But it was Galileo's inventive spirit that kept him on the cutting edge, always looking for the next big thing to explore or explain. As Galileo's reputation grew, so did his circle of friends and patrons. He was not above using his charm and wit to secure the support of influential figures, a skill as vital in the Renaissance as it is today. With the backing of the powerful Medici family, Galileo's work gained a platform that extended far beyond the confines of academia. He dedicated discoveries to his patrons, like naming 4 of Jupiter's moons after the Medici children, because nothing ensures loyalty like celestial flattery. In the grand tapestry of history, Galileo's early years may not have been filled with the earth-shattering discoveries that would come later, but they set the stage for a life of relentless curiosity and defiance. He was a man who dared to ask questions when everyone else was content with answers handed down by tradition. He had yet to point his telescope skyward or pen his most controversial works, but the seeds of revolution were already firmly planted in his mind. And so, as Galileo's story unfolds, remember that every great figure starts somewhere, usually in a place far less glamorous than legend would have you believe. Before he was the father of modern astronomy, Galileo was just a curious young man with a penchant for questioning authority and a talent for making things fall, sometimes from great heights, sometimes from grace. Galileo's story was just warming up, and in the world of academia, he was about to make more waves than a duck in a koi pond. Settled in Padua, Galileo was ready to unleash his genius on the unsuspecting world. He was a professor, sure, but teaching was just the day job. His real passion, turning the academic establishment upside down and maybe a little inside out, for good measure. During his 18-year stint at the University of Padua, Galileo didn't just lecture, he performed. Imagine a Renaissance version of a TED talk, minus the PowerPoint, but with a lot more chalk dust. His students weren't just pupils, they were an audience, and Galileo knew how to keep them on the edge of their wooden benches. He dissected Aristotle's theories, like a Renaissance Gordon Ramsay tearing apart an overcooked steak, and his students couldn't get enough of it. But let's talk about one of Galileo's less starry, yet equally impressive, contributions, the military compass. Also known as a sector, this device was the Swiss Army knife of its time. Developed around 1597, it was a gadget that made mathematicians and military officers alike swoon. The compass could calculate everything from fortification angles to artillery trajectories. Think of it as the Renaissance's version of a smartphone app for warfare, minus the in-app purchases. Galileo even wrote a manual for it, a how-to guide that would make IKEA instructions look like ancient hieroglyphs. The economic context here is crucial. Galileo wasn't just inventing for the love of the game. He needed cash. Being a professor was all well and good, but it didn't exactly pay like a Milanese banker. By selling his compass, he was able to supplement his income, ensuring that his pursuit of knowledge didn't mean a life of monastic poverty. At about 50 scudi per compass, this invention was a lifeline, proving once again that necessity is the mother of invention, especially when rents due. Now, onto the real showstopper, Galileo's telescopic discoveries. In 1609, Galileo got wind of a new invention coming out of the Netherlands, a charming little thing called the telescope. Never one to miss out on a party, Galileo quickly set about building his own. With a little tinkering, he improved the magnification from the original 3x to a whopping 30x. This wasn't just an upgrade. It was like swapping a pair of reading glasses for a Hubble space telescope. Galileo turned his telescope to the heavens, and what he saw changed everything. The moon, once thought to be a perfect, smooth orb, was a pockmarked mess. It had mountains, valleys, and craters, a real lunar landscape that would make any geographer weep with joy. And Jupiter, not just a lonely giant in the sky, but a planet with moons of its own. In January 1610, Galileo discovered 4 of them: Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. Naturally, he named them the Medicean stars after his patrons, the Medici family, because why not mix a little celestial naming with some good old-fashioned flattery? These discoveries were a direct challenge to the geocentric model of the universe, which placed Earth at the center of it all. With the grace of a meteorite through a stained glass window, Galileo's findings supported the Copernican heliocentric model. The Earth wasn't the center of the universe. That was the academic equivalent of saying the Earth was round to a room full of flat earthers. It was scandalous, revolutionary, and utterly irresistible. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with Galileo's cosmic revelations. The academic world was filled with scholars who clung to the geocentric model with the same fervor as a cat clings to a sunny windowsill. These were people who had built careers, reputations, and entire philosophies on the idea of Earth's centrality. Galileo's discoveries were a threat to their very way of thinking, and they weren't going to let some Tuscan upstart ruin their carefully constructed universe without a fight. The pushback was intense. Critics accused Galileo of heresy, of being a charlatan, and probably of having questionable taste in wine. But Galileo was nothing if not persistent. He published his findings in Sidereus Nuncius, or The Starry Messenger, in 1610. The book sold like Renaissance hotcakes, spreading his revolutionary ideas across Europe faster than gossip at a courtly ball. As Galileo's fame grew, so did his list of enemies. He was challenging not just scientific orthodoxy, but deeply held philosophical and religious beliefs. To many, the heavens were immutable, perfect, and divinely ordered. Galileo's observations suggested a universe that was dynamic, chaotic, and far from the perfect clockwork many imagined. It was a universe that didn't revolve around humanity, a humbling, if not entirely welcome, notion. Galileo wasn't just ruffling feathers. He was plucking them, and in some cases, setting them on fire. He was a man on a mission, and that mission was to uncover the truth, one telescopic observation at a time. His work laid the foundation for modern astronomy, turning the night sky from a flat canvas into a three-dimensional theater of celestial wonders. As Galileo's story continues to unfold, remember that his journey was far from over. He had yet to face the full wrath of the Inquisition, to pen his most controversial works, and to stand trial for his beliefs. But for now, he was a man at the height of his powers, peering through a telescope at a universe that was infinitely more complex, more beautiful, and more mysterious than anyone had dared to imagine. In the grand scheme of things, Galileo was just getting started, and the reverberations of his discoveries would echo through the centuries. So buckle up, because the next act of Galileo's life promises more drama, more controversy, and more awe-inspiring revelations. The stars, as they say, were the limit. And so, with Galileo's telescope pointed skyward and his reputation shooting through the Renaissance stratosphere, Europe found itself spellbound by Sidereus Nuncius, or The Starry Messenger. This slim volume, published in 1610, was the cosmic equivalent of a bestseller, and for good reason. Galileo wasn't merely detailing his observations. He was inviting Europe to look up and see a universe that was as unpredictable as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Let's start with that moon. Before Galileo's observations, the moon was thought to be a smooth, unblemished orb, as perfect as the god who supposedly crafted it. But through Galileo's lens, this celestial body was more cratered and parked than a teenager in the throes of a pizza binge. He sketched the moon's surface with mountains and valleys, challenging the Aristotelian notion of celestial perfection. Imagine the gasps when people realized that the moon was more like a cosmic teenager with acne than a divine disco ball. Then there was Jupiter, the gas giant with an entourage. Galileo spotted 4 moons, Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, dancing around Jupiter in a celestial waltz. Naming them the Medicean stars was a brilliant PR move, akin to naming a stadium after your biggest sponsor. But Galileo's discovery was more than a sycophantic nod to the Medicis. It was a direct challenge to the Earth-centered universe that had held sway for centuries. If moons could orbit Jupiter, then why was it so hard to believe that planets could orbit the sun? And let's not forget Venus, that bright evening star with a secret life. Galileo observed Venus going through phases, much like the moon, which was only possible if Venus orbited the sun, not the Earth. This was yet another nail in the coffin of the geocentric model. If Earth wasn't the center of everything, then what else had we gotten wrong? It was a humbling moment, like realizing that the Earth wasn't flat, or that your favorite pop star lip-syncs at concerts. Now, you might be thinking, surely everyone was thrilled with these discoveries. But if history teaches us anything, it's that people cling to their beliefs like barnacles to a ship. The Catholic Church, in particular, was not amused. Galileo's observations were a cosmic slap in the face to the established order, universe neatly arranged with Earth at its core, a divine hierarchy as comforting as a warm blanket on a cold night. The Church's reaction was less eureka and more off with his head. Well, metaphorically speaking. at least for now. The church wasn't just about saving souls, it was about maintaining control. Galileo's findings threatened to unravel the carefully stitched tapestry of religious and philosophical beliefs that placed humanity at the center of creation. In a world where God was the grand clockmaker, Galileo's universe was one where the clock had more moving parts than anyone had bargained for. But let's not paint Galileo as a lone wolf challenging the ecclesiastical behemoth. He had allies, intellectuals, fellow scientists, and patrons who saw the value in his work. Yet, there was no denying that he was poking the proverbial bear. The church's initial reaction was one of disbelief and denial. "How dare you, sir?" that reverberated through the hallowed halls of power. It wasn't just about astronomy, it was about authority, and Galileo was threatening to topple a centuries-old regime with a few well-aimed observations. The economic context of Galileo's discoveries can't be ignored either. The printing press was in full swing, making the dissemination of ideas faster than ever. Sidereus Nuncius was published in Latin, the lingua franca of the educated elite, ensuring that Galileo's revelations spread like wildfire among Europe's intellectual circles. It was the Renaissance equivalent of going viral, and Galileo's findings were the latest meme in a world hungry for new knowledge. Yet, as much as Galileo was a man of science, he was also a man of his time. He knew the power of patronage and the importance of keeping influential friends close. His dedication of the Medicean stars to the Medici family wasn't just a gesture of gratitude. It was a strategic move to ensure continued support and protection. In a world where scientific discovery could be as dangerous as political treachery, Galileo was playing a high-stakes game of intellectual chess. But let's not get too far ahead. The church's full wrath was still to come, and Galileo's journey was far from over. For now, he was a man at the pinnacle of his career, peering through his telescope at a universe that was as vast and as mysterious as the human imagination itself. The stars were no longer distant, unknowable points of light. They were worlds unto themselves, filled with possibilities and questions that begged to be explored. As we leave Galileo for the moment, poised on the brink of even greater controversy, remember this. History is not just about the grand narratives, but about the individuals who dared to ask, what if? Galileo was one such individual, a man who refused to accept the status quo and who saw the universe not as it was told to him, but as it was revealed through his own eyes. And in doing so, he changed the world forever, one starry night at a time. The stage was set for a cosmic showdown, and Galileo, ever the scientist, was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The universe, it seemed, was not done with him yet. Galileo's universe was certainly not done with him, and neither was the Roman Catholic Church. By 1616, the Church had noticed Galileo's heliocentric leanings, and it wasn't exactly giving him a celestial high five. Instead, it issued a formal warning to our favorite stargazer, urging him to abandon the Copernican model. You know, the one that suggested the Earth wasn't the VIP of the cosmos. The Church's stance was as rigid as a starched collar, and they were prepared to enforce it like a Renaissance bouncer at the Cosmic Club. But Galileo, ever the intellectual provocateur, didn't take kindly to being told to zip his lips. Fast forward to 1632, and he released Dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, a cheeky book structured as a conversation between three characters. In it, Galileo cleverly defended the heliocentric theory while ostensibly remaining neutral. It was a masterclass in subtext, like a 17th-century version of a Twitter subtweet aimed straight at the establishment. The character Simplicio, who represented the geocentric view, was portrayed as something of a simpleton, which didn't exactly endear Galileo to his critics. Now, let's talk about timing. Galileo's book hit the shelves during the 30 Years' War, a conflict so sprawling it was the Game of Thrones of its day, minus the dragons, but with plenty of fire and blood. It was a time of religious and political chaos, and Galileo's ideas were like a match in a powder keg. The Catholic Church, already embroiled in this continental quagmire, wasn't about to let a Tuscan mathematician throw another spanner in the works. In 1633, Galileo was summoned to Rome to face the Inquisition, and it was less of a friendly chat over espresso and more of a grueling trial. Now, let's set the scene. Galileo, then 68 and suffering from ill health, was hauled before a court that wasn't exactly famed for its leniency. The Inquisition had a reputation for making medieval justice look like a day at the spa, and Galileo was about to find out firsthand. The trial was a spectacle of ecclesiastical pageantry. Galileo was accused of heresy, charge as serious as a heart attack, especially in an era when being branded a heretic could lead to outcomes more unpleasant than a dentist visit in the Dark Ages. The Church demanded Galileo renounce the heliocentric model, and after weeks of interrogation that would make a reality show producer blush, he finally caved. Under the threat of torture, Galileo recanted his views in June 1633, uttering the famous, though likely apocryphal, phrase, "E per se muove," and yet it moves. It's the kind of line that encapsulates the defiant spirit of a scientist who couldn't fully silence his inner truth-teller, even when faced with ecclesiastical pressure. Galileo's punishment was house arrest, which sounds like a slap on the wrist until you remember that it effectively silenced him for the rest of his life. No more stargazing parties or dropping truth bombs from the safety of his observatory. For a man whose mind roamed the universe, confinement was a cruel irony, like telling a bird not to sing. From then on, Galileo was restricted to his villa in Arcetri, near Florence, where he spent his remaining years under the watchful eye of the Church, because nothing says, "We trust you," like a clerical babysitter. Despite his house arrest, Galileo's mind was as active as ever. He continued his work on motion and mechanics, laying the groundwork for Newton's later discoveries. If the Church thought they could keep him down, they underestimated the tenacity of a man who once peered at the stars and saw a universe waiting to be understood. His final years were spent working on two new sciences, a book that would eventually make its way to the Netherlands for publication in 1638. It was a fitting swan song for a man who refused to let his spirit be shackled, even when his body was. In the bigger picture, Galileo's trial was more than just a clash between a scientist and the Church. It was a reflection of the tension between old-world authority and the burgeoning new world of scientific inquiry. The Church, standing as the bastion of traditional knowledge, saw Galileo's ideas as a threat to its authority, fearing that if people started questioning the heavens, they might start questioning everything else too. Galileo wasn't just challenging the celestial order. He was challenging the very foundation of a society that believed it had all the answers neatly packaged in religious doctrine. The economic and political context of the 30 Years' War only added fuel to the fire. Europe was a continent in turmoil, with shifting alliances, religious conflicts, and power struggles. In such a volatile environment, Galileo's ideas were seen as dangerous, not just because they challenged scientific conventions, but because they threatened to destabilize a fragile social order. The Church acted as both spiritual guide and political player, and any challenge to its authority was met with the full force of its considerable influence. Galileo's story, with all its drama and intrigue, serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of stifling intellectual inquiry. It's a reminder that progress is often met with resistance, and that the path to understanding is rarely smooth. Yet, despite the trials he faced, Galileo's legacy endures. His work laid the foundation for modern science, and his courage in the face of adversity continues to inspire those who dare to question the status quo. As we leave Galileo, confined but unbroken, remember that his story is a testament to the power of curiosity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. Even under house arrest, Galileo's ideas continue to shine, lighting the way for future generations of scientists and thinkers. The universe, as he saw it, was vast and full of wonders, and his life's work was a beacon for those who dared to look beyond the known and into the infinite possibilities that lay beyond. In the end, Galileo's clash with the Church wasn't just a battle over celestial theories. It was a fight for the freedom to explore, to question, and to imagine a world that was greater than the sum of its parts. And though Galileo himself was silenced, his ideas echoed through the corridors of time, proving that while you can cage a man, you can't cage the truth. And so, even with the Church breathing down his neck like a particularly judgmental guardian angel, Galileo didn't let house arrest dull his intellectual spark. The man was a veritable think tank, even when confined to his villa's four walls. While some might have taken the opportunity to perfect the art of doing nothing, Galileo penned two new sciences, a magnum opus that would cement his legacy as a pioneer of physics. Published in 1638, this work was a testament to Galileo's resilience and genius. It wasn't just a book. It was a masterclass in mechanics and motion, a subject he'd been tinkering with like a Renaissance MacGyver. Galileo tackled everything from the strength of materials to the motion of projectiles, laying the groundwork for what would become classical mechanics. His insights into kinematics and material science were leaps ahead of his time. Think of them as the scientific equivalent of inventing the smartphone in the age of rotary phones. Two new sciences were smuggled out of Italy, a place where it might have been as welcome as a fox in a henhouse, and found its way to the more liberal Dutch Republic. There, it was published for the world to see, demonstrating once again that you can't keep a good theory down. Galileo's work spread across Europe like wildfire, influencing a whole generation of thinkers who were itching to ask their own what-ifs. In this book, Galileo introduced concepts that would later be refined by another scientific heavyweight, Sir Isaac Newton. It's here that we find the delicious irony of historical timing. Galileo died on January 8, 1642, the same year Newton was born. It's as if the universe had hit the reset button on scientific progress, eager to pass the torch from one great mind to another. Galileo's final breath marked not just the end of an era, but the dawn of a new one, as if the cosmos itself was whispering, "Next." Now, let's zoom out for a moment and consider Galileo's legacy. His trial and subsequent house arrest were cautionary tales about the dangers of challenging the status quo, but they also highlighted the unstoppable nature of truth. Galileo's willingness to stand by his observations, even when faced with the threat of the Inquisition, was a bold statement that the pursuit of knowledge was worth the risk of ruffling a few ecclesiastical feathers. His work was a spark that lit the fuse of the scientific revolution, a movement that would go on to challenge every corner of human understanding. But let's not sugarcoat it. Galileo was as much a product of his environment as he was a shaper of it. The Renaissance was a time of rediscovery, a period when the shackles of medieval thought were being cast off in favor of reason and evidence. Galileo was riding the wave of this intellectual renaissance, and he knew it. His strategic use of patronage, his deft navigation of political landscapes, and his ability to communicate complex ideas in an accessible way were all part of his genius. He was a scientist who understood the art of persuasion, an innovator who knew how to play the game. Economically, Galileo's work also had profound implications. His experiments and inventions, from the telescope to the military compass, were more than just academic exercises. They had practical applications that extended to navigation, warfare, and even architecture. In a world that was increasingly interconnected, thanks to the age of exploration, Galileo's contributions helped shape an era of discovery and expansion. His work supported the burgeoning mercantile economies of Europe, providing tools and knowledge that would drive trade routes and empire building. And let's give a nod to the mythos surrounding Galileo. The story of a lone genius standing up to the might of the church has a certain romantic allure, doesn't it? But the reality is more nuanced. Galileo had allies, supporters, and a network that helped him disseminate his ideas. He wasn't a solitary figure fighting against the world. He was part of a broader scientific community that was pushing the boundaries of knowledge. His story is as much about collaboration as it is about individual brilliance. In the end, Galileo's legacy is a complex tapestry of science, politics, and human ambition. His contributions to our understanding of the universe were monumental, but his story also serves as a reminder of the costs of challenging entrenched systems. Galileo's life was a testament to the power of curiosity and the human spirit's relentless quest for truth. He may have left this world under the shadow of house arrest, but his ideas soared far beyond the confines of his villa, lighting the way for future generations. So, as we close the book on Galileo's chapter, remember that his story is not just one of scientific discovery, but of the triumph of intellectual courage over dogmatic constraint. It's a narrative that resonates through history, echoing in the halls of academia and beyond. Galileo's life teaches us that while the pursuit of knowledge may be fraught with challenges, it is also one of humanity's greatest endeavors. In the grand cosmic dance, Galileo twirled with the stars, and in doing so, he forever changed the way we see the universe and ourselves. In the grand theater of history, where empires rise and fall like overly ambitious soufflés, the Incas stand out as the folks who decided to build their masterpiece in a place where most would fear to pitch a tent. Welcome to Machu Picchu, a city perched high up in the Andes like a crown jewel in a particularly challenging tiara. But before we delve into the whys and hows of Machu Picchu's lofty existence, let's take a look at the people behind this mountain marvel, the Incas. The Incas, not ones to do things by halves, were the kind of empire builders who saw a sheer cliff face and thought, perfect, let's put a city there. By the early 15th century, these guys controlled a stretch of land about 500 miles long, covering parts of what we now know as Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Argentina, Chile, and Colombia. At its peak, the Inca Empire was home to around 10 million people, which means they had more subjects than some modern-day countries. And they did all this without the wheel, iron tools, or a written language. It's like running a multinational corporation without email. Impressive, chaotic, and slightly terrifying. So, who was at the helm of this formidable empire during the birth of Machu Picchu? Enter Pachacuti Inca Yupanqui, an emperor with a name so grand, it practically demands a drum roll. Pachacuti, who reigned from 1438 to 1471, was the 9th Sapa Inca, or the only Inca, a title suggesting either a healthy ego or a serious lack of competition. He was a man of vision, both literally and metaphorically. His reign was marked by an aggressive expansion of the empire, which he managed with all the subtlety of a land-grabbing monopoly player. Now, why would Pachacuti decide to build a city on a mountain? Was it for the spectacular views? Perhaps the rarefied air was good for the complexion. The truth is a mix of strategic genius and sheer audacity. In the early 15th century, the Andes was a hotbed of political intrigue and local rivalries. By placing a city in such a remote and defensible location, Pachacuti was not just showcasing his architectural prowess, but also making a bold political statement. We're here, we're mighty, and good luck trying to conquer us. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. Building Machu Picchu was not just about aesthetics or strategic vantage points. It was a practical solution to a very pressing problem: how to sustain an ever-expanding empire in a region where flat land was as rare as a unicorn sighting. The Incas were masters of agriculture, and part of their genius lay in terracing the steep mountainsides to create arable land. Machu Picchu, with its meticulously designed terraces, was an agricultural powerhouse. The construction of Machu Picchu was no small feat. It required the labor of thousands of workers over several decades. Imagine the logistics of transporting massive stone blocks up a mountain without the wheel or pack animals. Instead, they used a system of ropes, logs, and sheer manpower. Estimates suggest that around 50,000 tons of stone were moved to create the city. That's about the weight of 400 blue whales, in case you're wondering. Pachacuti's decision to build Machu Picchu was also influenced by religious beliefs. The Incas worshipped a pantheon of gods, with Inti, the sun god, reigning supreme. The site's alignment with the sun's movements suggests it was a center for religious ceremonies, a place where the divine and earthly realms met. So, in a way, Machu Picchu was not just a city, but a celestial observatory and a spiritual haven. This was where the elite could commune with the gods, far from the dusty politics of the empire. Of course, Machu Picchu's mystique has only grown with time, mostly thanks to Hiram Bingham, the American historian and explorer who stumbled upon the site in 1911. Bingham was convinced he had found Vilcabamba, the last stronghold of the Inca resistance. Spoiler alert, he was wrong, but his romanticized accounts helped catapult Machu Picchu into the global spotlight. And thus, myths were born, blending fact with fiction, like a historical cocktail that goes down smoothly but leaves you with questions in the morning. Let's not forget the harsh realities behind this story. The construction of Machu Picchu wasn't just a labor of love. It was also a labor of, well, laborers. The Incas practiced a system called mira, a mandatory public service which, while not exactly slavery, wasn't quite a family vacation either. Thousands of workers toiled on these projects, their contributions largely unsung in the grand narratives of history. And yet, despite these gritty truths, The allure of Machu Picchu persists. Its terraces and temples, the precision of its stonework, the sheer audacity of its location, all of these continue to captivate, reminding us of a time when the Incas looked at mountains and saw potential, not obstacles. They were empire builders in the truest sense, shaping their world with a blend of ingenuity, faith, and an unwavering belief in their destiny. As we prepare to explore the engineering marvel that Machu Picchu became, remember this. The story of its construction is more than just a tale of stone and sweat. It's a testament to human ambition, a saga of a people who dared to dream beyond the horizon, building a legacy that would endure long after their empire had faded into the mists of history. So, as we stand on the precipice of history's grandest DIY project, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of how Machu Picchu's stonework came to be. Spoiler, it doesn't involve ancient aliens, no matter how much the History Channel might insist otherwise. Instead, it's a testament to human ingenuity, sweat, and probably a few choice words muttered under the breath of exhausted workers. First off, let's talk stones. The Incas were not dealing with your run-of-the-mill pebbles. They maneuvered massive granite blocks, some tipping the scales at 50 tons. That's roughly equivalent to a herd of elephants, except these stones didn't pack themselves into neat little groups and march up the mountain. The Incas had to get creative, and boy, did they deliver. Imagine a construction site where the workers are more akin to choreographers than builders, coordinating the movement of these behemoths with the grace of a Broadway dance number. Without the help of the wheel, because, let's face it, the terrain was more suited to mounting goats than rolling carts, the Incas relied on human and natural resources. Logs, ropes, and sheer manpower were the tools of the trade. They employed a technique known as sledge and lever, where logs acted as rollers, and levers were used to nudge the stones along. It was like a giant, ancient game of Jenga, except failure meant more than just a few scattered blocks. It meant a lot of unhappy laborers and a very grumpy foreman. Now, you might wonder, why all this effort? Why not just build on flatter ground? The answer lies in the Incas' understanding of the Andes geology. They chose their stone sources wisely, often quarrying from sites like the nearby quarry at Rumacalca, where the stones had the strength to withstand the elements. The Incas were not only architects, but geologists, picking rocks that would endure the test of time, or at least outlast the next emperor's reign. The stonework itself is a marvel of precision engineering. The Incas employed a method called ashlar masonry, fitting stones so tightly together that not even a pin could be slipped between them. No mortar here, folks. It's as if the stones were nature's own jigsaw puzzle, each piece deliberately shaped to lock into the next. And let's not gloss over the fact that these stones were carved using nothing more than harder rocks and bronze tools. It's a bit like sculpting Michelangelo's David with a butter knife, painstaking and requiring a level of patience that most of us can only aspire to while waiting for our phones to update. But here's the kicker. This was not just about aesthetics. This kind of construction was also a practical stroke of genius. The tight stonework made the walls earthquake-resistant. The Andes are as seismically restless as a caffeinated cat, and the Incas knew this. Their construction methods allowed the buildings to absorb and dissipate the energy of an earthquake, preventing catastrophic collapse. Next time your IKEA bookshelf wobbles, spare a thought for these ancient engineers who built to last. Let's take a moment to debunk some myths. While the Incas were undoubtedly brilliant, the idea that they had some secret knowledge or extraterrestrial help is about as credible as a politician's campaign promises. The truth is much simpler, though no less impressive. The Incas relied on a deep understanding of their environment, a knack for problem-solving, and sheer determination. They didn't need flying saucers or alien architects, just a lot of hard work and a pinch of human ingenuity. Now, let's not ignore the labor aspect. It's easy to romanticize the grandeur of Machu Picchu, but the reality for those who built it was far from idyllic. As mentioned before, the Mita system demanded significant labor contributions from the populace. This wasn't a casual 9-to-5 gig. It was backbreaking work under conditions that would make modern labor laws shudder. Yet, it's a testament to the community-driven spirit of the Inca Empire, where collective effort was valued over individual gain. It's a harsh reality wrapped in a noble ideal, much like a bitter pill coated in sugar. Economically, this project was no small undertaking. The labor force needed to be fed, housed, and organized. a logistical challenge of monumental proportions. The Incas had mastered the art of resource allocation long before MBAs made it cool. They utilized a system of storehouses, or calcas, strategically placed along the empire's extensive road network, ensuring that supplies reached even the most remote construction sites. It was like Amazon Prime with llamas instead of drones. Politically, Machu Picchu was a symbol of imperial power and divine right. Pachacute wasn't just building a city, he was crafting a statement both to his subjects and rival states. The sheer audacity of constructing such a site in the Andes was a testament to the Incas' dominance and their emperor's vision. It was a bold proclamation. Look upon our works, ye mighty, and despair. Or at least, good luck trying to top this. As we continue to peel back the layers of Machu Picchu's construction, remember that this was more than a mere architectural endeavor. It was a complex tapestry woven from the threads of human ambition, natural beauty, and the relentless drive to conquer both earth and sky. The Incas saw the mountain not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity, a blank canvas upon which they could etch their legacy. So, as we marvel at their achievements, let's keep our eyes on the horizon, because this story has only just begun. So, as we marvel at their achievements, let's keep our eyes on the horizon, because this story has only just begun. And speaking of beginnings, it's time to delve into the nuts and bolts, or rather, the ropes and rocks, of how the Incas managed to pull off such an architectural coup. Welcome to the world of the Mida system, the Inca Empire's version of a civic duty, only with fewer bake sales and more heavy lifting. In the grand scheme of Inca society, Mida was less of a community service award and more of a congratulations, you've been voluntold scenario. Every able-bodied citizen, which was practically everyone who could walk and lift, had to contribute labor as a form of tax. Forget about writing a check or filing an online return. Your payment was made in sweat and calluses. The Incas' version of tax season involved a lot more stone hauling and significantly fewer accountants. Now, let's talk numbers. The empire was divided into units of labor called islas, which were essentially extended family groups. Each ilu was responsible for providing a certain number of workers to fulfill the empire's demands. The state would call upon these groups to send men, and sometimes women, to work on various projects, including the construction of Machu Picchu. Estimates suggest that around 20,000 workers might have been involved at various stages of its construction, depending on the demands of the season. That's like a small city of laborers, all focused on chiseling, hauling, and building under the relentless Andean sun. The logistics of managing such a workforce were nothing short of Herculean. The Mida system required meticulous planning and coordination, akin to conducting an orchestra where every player is using a different instrument and the sheet music is, well, non-existent. The Incas didn't just throw workers at a problem and hope for the best. They had a well-oiled machine of administration that tracked labor, resources, and productivity. They could have taught modern project managers a thing or two about efficiency. Need a spreadsheet. They had quippers, knotted strings that recorded data, kind of tactile Excel for the ancient world. The economic structures supporting this were equally impressive. The Incas didn't just expect their laborers to show up with a packed lunch and a sense of duty. The empire provided food, clothing, and shelter for its workers. This wasn't just some altruistic streak. It was a calculated move to ensure that the labor force remained healthy and productive. The calcas, those storage facilities scattered like ancient Amazon warehouses, were stocked with supplies to sustain the workforce. It was a bit like socialism, but with a distinctly Incan flair and a lot of quinoa. Let's not sugarcoat it, though. While the Mida system was efficient, it wasn't exactly a picnic in the park. Labor was compulsory, and failure to comply could result in severe penalties. Imagine the worst performance review you've ever received, multiply it by 1,000, and you might get close to the level of dread associated with shirking your Mida duties. This wasn't just a job, it was a matter of survival and social standing. Yet, for all its demands, the Mida system had its perks, or at least, it was sold as having them. Workers were part of something greater than themselves, contributing to the glory of an empire that would endure for generations. Or so they were told. It's the kind of narrative that can make even the most grueling labor seem a little more palatable, like convincing yourself that running a marathon is fun because you get a medal at the end. Now, You might be wondering, how did the Incas ensure that all this effort didn't go to waste? The answer lies in their surprisingly modern approach to resource management. The Incas didn't just hoard resources, they circulated them, ensuring that no part of the empire was left out. Their road system, stretching over 25,000 miles, was the lifeline of the empire, a network that connected remote outposts with the heart of Inca power. It was like the Silk Road, but with more llamas and fewer luxury goods. This network wasn't just for moving goods, it was a channel for communication and control. Messengers, known as chasquis, dashed along these roads with the speed and stamina of Olympic athletes, carrying messages encoded on quippers. These human couriers could relay information across vast distances, a pace that would leave the Pony Express in the dust. It was the original fast lane, minus the traffic jams and tolls. Politically, the Mida system reinforced the emperor's power while knitting together the diverse cultures within the empire. It was the glue that held the vast Inca dominion together, ensuring that everyone, from the highland farmers to the coastal fishermen, had a stake in its continued success. This sense of shared purpose was vital, especially when dealing with the empire's many ethnic groups and languages. It was a multicultural mosaic, all bound by the common thread of labor and service. Of course, this rosy picture of unity and purpose glosses over the coercive nature of the system. In reality, the Mida was as much about control as it was about construction. By drawing people into state projects, the Incas could keep a watchful eye on potential dissenters and rebellious islas. After all, a workforce busy with empire building had less time to plot revolt. It's an age-old strategy. Keep the masses occupied, and they're less likely to question who's pulling the strings. As we pull back the curtain on the Incas' economic model, it becomes clear that their approach was both brilliant and brutal. It's a testament to human ingenuity and the lengths to which societies will go to build and maintain power. Machu Picchu wasn't just a city, it was the embodiment of an ideology, a testament to what can be achieved through collective effort and an unwavering vision. But let's not get too caught up in the grandeur of it all. The reality of life under the Mida system was far from idyllic. It was a hard, unforgiving world where your worth was measured in sweat and toil. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, these harsh conditions, the Incas managed to create something truly extraordinary. Machu Picchu stands as a monument to their resilience, a reminder that even in the face of immense challenges, human spirit and creativity can carve wonders from the raw stone of the earth. As we continue to unravel the story of Machu Picchu and its creators, remember this. The Incas were more than just builders of stone. They were architects of a society that valued order, efficiency, and the collective over the individual. In a world where resources were scarce and survival was a daily battle, they crafted an empire that thrived against the odds. It's a legacy that endures, etched into the mountains of the Andes, whispering stories of ambition, ingenuity, and a dream that reached for the heavens. So, as we prepare to delve deeper into the enigmatic allure of Machu Picchu, let's keep our imaginations tethered to reality. There's more to this story than meets the eye, and the best is yet to come. Stay tuned, because the Andes have a few more secrets to reveal, and the Incas' greatest hits are far from over. And so, as we stand on the brink of Machu Picchu's mystique, let's pivot to the cultural and spiritual significance of this Andean enigma. Picture it, a breathtaking panorama of stone terraces and temples that might have been Pachacuti's version of a five-star resort, an ancient Ritz-Carlton with a spiritual twist. But was it really just an emperor's glorified summer getaway, or something far more profound? Let's unravel the mystery, one stone at a time. To begin with, calling Machu Picchu a mere royal estate is like calling the Taj Mahal a cozy cottage. Sure, it's got the posh digs and panoramic views, but there's more under the hood. This wasn't just Pachacuti's mountain lodge, for when the hustle and bustle of Cuzco got too much. Oh no, it was a place where the divine met the earthly, where the Incas could showcase their architectural prowess and religious devotion in a single stroke of genius. One theory, which has historians nodding and skeptics raising eyebrows, is that Machu Picchu was a ceremonial center, a kind of spiritual hotspot where the Incas could commune with their deities, particularly in Tai, the sun god. And let's not forget Mama Quilla, the moon goddess, who, according to legend, kept a watchful eye on the empire's nocturnal activities. The alignment of the site with the solstices and equinoxes wasn't just for astrological giggles. It was a cosmic calendar, a celestial tracking system that would give any modern observatory a run for its money. Imagine looking up to the heavens and seeing your gods smile back. Talk about divine intervention. But before we get too starry-eyed, let's toss a wrench into the works. Some historians propose that Machu Picchu was more than just a place of worship. They argue it could have been an agricultural experiment station, a kind of Incan R&D department for new crops and farming techniques. After all, those terraces weren't just for show. They were meticulously designed to prevent erosion and maximize agricultural yield. If true, this would make Machu Picchu less of a spiritual retreat and more of a botanical think tank. Who knew that Pachacuri might have been a farmer at heart, mixing spirituality with a touch of agricultural innovation? And then there's the theory that Machu Picchu was a political statement, a literal high ground to demonstrate the emperor's power and divine right to rule. It wasn't just about praying to the sun or planting potatoes. It was about showing the world that the Incas could conquer nature itself. By building this architectural marvel, Pachacuri was essentially saying, "We've got the gods on speed dial, and we can grow dinner on a cliffside. Beat that." Now, let's address the pachyderm in the room, the myth of Machu Picchu as a lost city. Thanks to Hiram Bingham's enthusiastic proclamations, it's easy to picture the site as a hidden gem, shrouded in mystery and jungle vines. But hold your llamas. The truth is less Hollywood blockbuster and more historical footnote. Machu Picchu wasn't so much lost as it was forgotten by the outside world. Local indigenous populations were well aware of its existence. It just took a Yale professor with a flair for the dramatic to bring it to global attention. Speaking of drama, let's not skip over the idea that Machu Picchu was a sanctuary for the virgins of the sun. These were women dedicated to serving the temples and maintaining religious rituals. Their presence adds another layer of intrigue to the site's purpose. Were they spiritual caretakers, or was their role more about maintaining social and political alliances through marriage and sacrifice? The jury's still out, and with no ancient Inca diaries to leaf through, speculation is as good as it gets. Economically, Machu Picchu was a costly venture, both in terms of labor and resources. Imagine the logistical nightmare of hauling materials up a mountain path that makes modern hiking trails look like freeways. The cost wasn't just in stone and sweat, but in maintaining the site as a functioning community. This wasn't a weekend cabin. It was a fully fledged operation requiring a steady flow of supplies and manpower. The Incas didn't just build a city. They built an economy, complete with a support system that would make any corporate logistics manager weep with envy. But let's not gloss over the more unsavory aspects. The romantic image of Machu Picchu as a serene spiritual retreat belies the harsh reality of life for those who worked and lived there. The Mida system ensured a constant supply of labor, but it was a far cry from voluntarism. For many, this was a grueling existence, dictated by the whims of the empire and the demands of the gods. It's the kind of divine duty that makes you question whether the gods could maybe chip in with a miracle or two. Politically, Machu Picchu symbolized the unyielding grip of the Inca state on its subjects. It was a reminder of who held the power and who was favored by the deities. In a society where the lines between earthly authority and divine mandate were as blurred as a Renaissance painting, Machu Picchu was both a fortress and a fable. It's a testament to the Incas' knack for blending propaganda with piety, creating a narrative that was as compelling as it was controlling. So, was Machu Picchu a royal estate, a religious site, or Pachacuri's version of a summer home? The truth probably lies somewhere in between, a melange of practicality and mysticism, politics and faith. It's a complex tapestry woven from the threads of Incan ingenuity and ambition, a place where the mundane and the mythical coalesce in a dance as intricate as the stonework itself. As we gaze upon its terraces and temples, let's remember that Machu Picchu is more than just an archaeological wonder or a tourist mecca. It's a window into a world where the boundaries between heaven and earth were as fluid as the Urubamba River below. A place where every stone tells a story, every terrace holds a secret, and every sunrise brings the promise of revelation. So, as we continue our journey through the annals of Inca history, let's keep our minds open and our questions sharp. There's more to uncover, and the Andes have yet to reveal all their secrets. Stay tuned, because the saga of Machu Picchu is far from over, and the best is still to come. As the sun set on the legacy of the Incas, let's fast forward to the early 20th century, where the tale of Machu Picchu takes an unexpected twist. Enter Hiram Bingham, the Indiana Jones of academia, minus the fedora and bullwhip, a Yale historian with a penchant for adventure who would stumble upon the ancient city in 1911. Now, Bingham didn't exactly discover Machu Picchu, since local Quechua farmers were already well aware of the site. But credit where it's due. Bingham was the first to thrust it into the global spotlight, turning a scholarly escapade into an international sensation. Aided by a local guide, Melcher Arriga, and a few enthusiastic local kids who probably saw an opportunity to take a day off from chores, Bingham trekked through the dense jungle and up the steep slopes of the Andes. When he laid eyes on the ruins, it wasn't just the altitude that left him breathless. Bingham was convinced he'd found the lost city of Vilcabamba, the last refuge of the Inca kings. Spoiler alert, he hadn't. But as any good historian knows, never let the truth get in the way of a great story. Bingham's account of his discovery was like catnip to the Western world, hungry for tales of lost civilizations and hidden treasures. His articles and books painted Machu Picchu as a mystical, long-lost city, untouched by time, a place where the echoes of an ancient empire still whispered through the stones. It was a narrative that captivated the public and conveniently glossed over the fact that the locals had been farming those terraces for generations. Thanks to Bingham's flair for the dramatic, Machu Picchu quickly became a must-see destination for the intrepid traveler, the kind of place where you could imagine yourself as a pioneer, even if you arrived by train. By the mid-20th century, tourists were flocking to the site like moths to a flame, eager to experience the breathtaking vistas and the allure of standing amid the remnants of a once great civilization. But with great tourism comes great responsibility, or at least it should. The influx of visitors soon posed a threat to the site's preservation. By the 1980, Machu Picchu was facing a crisis, its stone pathways groaning under the weight of thousands of curious feet. The Peruvian government, recognizing both the economic potential and the cultural significance of Machu Picchu, began to implement measures to protect the site. In 1983, UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site, move that underscored its importance and the need for conservation efforts. Fast forward to the age of the selfie stick and social media influencers, and Machu Picchu has become as much a backdrop for Instagram posts as it is a historical wonder. With over 1.5 million tourists visiting annually by the early 2020, the challenge of balancing access with preservation has never been greater. The Peruvian authorities have implemented strict visitor limits, capping the number of daily tourists and requiring them to follow designated paths to minimize wear and tear. It's a delicate dance, trying to keep the site accessible yet protected, like hosting a wild party, but insisting everyone stays off the good carpet. The legacy of Machu Picchu is a tapestry of contradictions. It's a symbol of Inca ingenuity and resilience, yet its very survival now depends on modern technology and international cooperation. The site serves as a reminder of the empire's achievements, but also of the darker aspects of its history, where the glory of an emperor was often built on the backs of a laboring populace. It's a narrative that's as compelling as it is complex, one where the lines between history and myth blur like the morning mist over the Urubamba Valley. As we reflect on Machu Picchu's enduring allure, it's worth considering what it teaches us about human ambition and the drive to leave a mark on the world. The Incas saw the mountains as a challenge to be mastered, a place where they could etch their legacy into the rock itself. Their story is one of vision and tenacity, of creating something extraordinary in the most unlikely of places. It's a testament to what humanity can achieve when we're willing to reach beyond the horizon, even if it means dragging a few 50-ton stones along the way. But let's not get too carried away with romanticism. The preservation of Machu Picchu isn't just about keeping an ancient city intact. It's about respecting the culture and history of the people who continue to call the Andes home. It's a challenge to honor the past while embracing the future, to ensure that this marvel of Inca engineering remains a testament to human ingenuity and not just a backdrop for vacation selfies. In the end, Machu Picchu is a story of survival against the odds, a narrative that mirrors the resilience of the human spirit. It's a place where history and myth dance a delicate tango, where every stone has a story to tell. As we stand on the terraces of this ancient wonder, let's remember that we are but temporary guests in a place that has seen empires rise and fall. And perhaps, as we take in the breathtaking views, we might just catch a glimpse of the Inca's vision, a world where mountains are not barriers, but bridges to the heavens. In the quiet Dutch village of Zundert, on March 30, 1853, a certain Vincent van Gogh burst into the world, kicking and screaming his way into a family that was already knee-deep in religious fervor. Vincent's dad, Theodorus, was a pastor, and his mom, Anna, was a woman of the household, because back then that was a full-time gig. Now, if you're expecting Vincent to have been blessed with the serene childhood of a small-town boy, let's just say his life was more soap opera than Sunday sermon. From the get-go, Vincent's family was a mixed bag of expectations. There was a lot of pressure to conform, but Vincent was about as conformist as a cat in a dog show. His early years were spent dodging the typical path laid out by his parents, which was paved with good intentions and religious pamphlets. In fact, Vincent was supposed to follow in his old man's footsteps and become a pastor. Spoiler alert, that didn't quite pan out. Vincent was the eldest of 6 siblings, a lineage that included brothers, sisters, and a couple of siblings that didn't survive infancy. Notably, an elder brother named Vincent died before our Vincent was born, which is a bit like being handed a recycled name at birth. That might mess with anyone's head, and perhaps it did with Vincent's too, adding a dash of existential angst to his artistic soul. Let's fast forward to Vincent's attempts to find his footing in the grown-up world. He took a stab at being an art dealer, started at the Goupil and Sy Gallery in The Hague at the tender age of 16. But here's the twist. The job required a knack for schmoozing, and Vincent was about as sociable as a hedgehog at a balloon party. He was transferred to London and later Paris, where his complete lack of salesmanship led to his ungraceful exit in 1876. Apparently, his idea of customer service was to scold clients for not appreciating art enough. Surprise, surprise, that wasn't in the employee handbook. Next stop, the clergy. Vincent took a swing at theology school in Amsterdam, but academia didn't suit him either. He bailed after a year, then tried his luck at a missionary school. You'd think a son of a pastor could handle a little pulpit action, but Vincent was more drawn to the misfits than the faithful. His attempt at being a preacher in the coal-mining district of Borinage, Belgium, was nothing short of a disaster. Vincent took the vow of poverty a bit too seriously, giving away his clothes to the miners and living like a hermit. The church authorities weren't impressed. He got the boot after 6 months. By 1880, Vincent had failed at more careers than most people have in a lifetime. But here's the kicker. All these false starts nudged him towards his true calling. He decided to embrace his long-standing passion for drawing and painting, much to his family's skepticism. After all, an artist's life was no guarantee of success or stability. It was more like a leap of faith off a cliff into an ocean of uncertainty. Vincent's early artistic endeavors were as tumultuous as his career attempts. He didn't have formal training, so he was essentially the original DIY artist. His first drawings were raw, depicting the harsh realities of rural life, which was a far cry from the polished landscapes people were used to. But Vincent had a knack for seeing beauty in the mundane, and the mundane in beauty, which is a talent in itself. In 1881, he moved back to his parents' house in the Netherlands, in Etten, and began devoting himself entirely to art. He was like a man possessed, sketching and painting with feverish intensity. But of course, family dynamics were as volatile as ever. His father, Theodorus, had a heart attack in 1885, which led to a family feud that would make today's reality TV shows look like child's play. This was the same year Vincent painted The Potato Eaters, a Sama masterpiece that featured peasants around a dinner table, illuminated by the dim glow of an oil lamp. It was a gritty portrayal of rural life, and Vincent considered it a success, even if contemporary critics thought it was as appealing as a meal of cold potatoes. Vincent's early years were like a roller coaster operated by a half-blind conductor, and despite, or maybe because of, these tribulations, He was carving out his own niche. His failed attempts at conventional careers, his clashes with family, and his relentless pursuit of art were all pieces of a complex puzzle that would eventually form the picture of a man who, though he couldn't hold down a job, found his purpose in colors and canvases. Stay tuned, because Vincent's journey is just getting started, and trust me, it's anything but a straight line. And so, just like that, Vincent van Gogh embarked on a new chapter, throwing himself into the bohemian chaos of Paris in 1886. It was a city that buzzed with revolution, not the kind with pitchforks and barricades, but one splattered across canvases in bold strokes and vibrant hues. Paris was the epicenter of the art world, a place where weary traditions went to die and radical ideas were born over cheap wine and cigarette smoke. The city was a carnival of color and creativity, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for our man Vincent. His arrival coincided with the rise of the Impressionists. Monet, Renoir, and Degas had already shaken the art scene to its core. These guys were the rebels with a cause, ditching the meticulous detail of academic painting for a freer, more expressive style. Vincent, with his rustic Dutch roots, faced the challenge of fitting in with this avant-garde crowd. He was the new kid in a school where everyone else already had their cliques and inside jokes. Vincent's time in Paris was like an artist's boot camp on steroids. He swapped the summer palette of the potato eaters for the electrifying colors that would later define his work. His brother Theo, who was a saint of patience and pocketbook, funded Vincent's artistic escapades. Theo was working as an art dealer in Paris, which was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, he provided Vincent with a lifeline. On the other, he had to endure Vincent's explosive moods and relentless critiques of the art world. Our Dutch maestro rented a studio in Montmartre, a neighborhood that was a hotbed of creativity and, quite frankly, debauchery. The place was crawling with artists, poets, and the kind of characters who'd inspire novels and nightmares. It was here that Vincent met Paul Gauguin, a friendship that would become the stuff of art history legend. Gauguin was a former stockbroker turned painter, a man with a taste for exotic locales and a talent for stirring the pot. Now, here's the juicy part. Vincent and Gauguin's friendship was as volatile as a chemistry lab experiment gone wrong. They were both passionate about art, but that's pretty much where the similarities ended. Gauguin was all about the bold and primitive, while Vincent was on a mission to capture the soul of the everyday. Their debates were legendary. Think of them as the art world's version of a heavyweight boxing match, with brushstrokes instead of punches. In 1888, Vincent moved to Arles in the south of France, craving the kind of light that could make even a skeptic believe in magic. He convinced Gauguin to join him, envisioning an artistic utopia where they and other artists could live and work. Vincent dreamed of his yellow house as a sanctuary of creativity, but it turned into a pressure cooker of clashing egos and tempers. The infamous ear incident, the one everyone remembers vaguely from high school art class. It was the climax of their fiery cohabitation. The story goes that Vincent, in a fit of despair or madness, sliced off part of his own ear after a heated argument with Gauguin. But let's take a step back from the dramatic headlines. The truth is a bit murkier, and possibly less sensational than the legend suggests. Historians have debated the specifics for years, trying to piece together the events of that fateful December night. Some say Gauguin was wielding a sword during their argument. Yes, a literal sword fight over art. Others suggest that Vincent, plagued by mental illness and alcohol, was simply overwhelmed by his inner demons. What we do know is that Vincent delivered the severed piece of ear to a local brothel, wrapped in newspaper, as a gift to a woman named Rachel. Talk about a bizarre Christmas present. This episode led to Vincent's hospitalization, a period of his life marked by both creative bursts and debilitating struggles with his mental health. He was diagnosed with what was then called acute mania with generalized delirium, a condition that would today probably be classified under a different medical label. It's easy to romanticize the tortured artist, but let's be real. Vincent's life was no walk in the park. His mental health challenges were as much a part of his story as his artistic genius. Despite his personal battles, Vincent's time in Arles was incredibly productive. He painted some of his most famous works during this period, including Sunflowers and The Bedroom. These masterpieces weren't just pretty pictures. They were Vincent's way of trying to capture the vibrancy of life even as he grappled with his own shadows. The economic realities of Vincent's life were as bleak as the coal mines he'd once preached to. He sold only one painting during his lifetime, The Red Vineyard, for 400 francs, about $2,000 in today's money. Meanwhile, he churned out over 300 pieces in Arles alone. This wasn't just about creating art. It was a compulsion, a need to pour his soul onto the canvas. In a world that measured success by sales and acclaim, Vincent was a square peg in a round hole. His relationship with Gogh never fully recovered from the ear episode. Gogh left Arles, and Vincent was left to confront his demons in solitude. But their fractious friendship was more than just a cautionary tale of artistic rivalry. It was a powerful force that pushed both men to their creative limits. The myth of Vincent and Gogh is a seductive one, fueled by the allure of artistic genius and personal tragedy. But it's also a reminder of the fragile line between brilliance and madness, the kind of story that has kept us fascinated for over a century. As we continue this journey through Vincent's life, remember that every brushstroke was a testament to his resilience, a defiance against a world that often seemed indifferent to his struggles. So stay tuned, because Vincent's story is far from over. His time in Paris and Arles set the stage for the final act of his life, a period marked by both profound beauty and heartbreaking despair. As we explore the next chapters, we'll see how Vincent's legacy was shaped not just by his art, but by the complex tapestry of his experiences and relationships. As Vincent's time in Arles unfolded, it was like watching a kaleidoscope spin out of control, vivid, mesmerizing, and just a little bit dizzying. Here in the sun-soaked south of France, he painted like a man possessed, churning out over 200 paintings and 100 drawings in just over a year. If it sounds like he was competing in a marathon with a paintbrush, that's because he kind of was. Vincent wasn't just painting. He was exorcising demons with every flick of his wrist. This was his therapy, his rebellion, his lifeline. The irony, this prolific output was happening while Vincent was as financially stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. The man was perpetually broke, relying almost entirely on his brother Theo's generosity to keep the pigments flowing. Imagine producing masterpieces while living like a starving artist cliché. Except this was no cliché for Vincent. It was his daily reality. He couldn't sell a painting to save his life, and let's face it, his sales pitch probably needed some work. Buy my painting, or don't, whatever, isn't exactly a winning strategy. Here's a fun economic tidbit. The only painting Vincent managed to sell during his lifetime was The Red Vineyard, which went for a whopping 400 francs. Today, that might buy you a fancy dinner, but in the art world it was peanuts. Fast forward to today, and Vincent's works fetch hundreds of millions at auctions. It's the kind of posthumous irony that would make anyone's eyes roll, especially Vincent's. Back then, he was more concerned with affording canvas and paint than with future fame or fortune. Now, let's talk about the myth of the tortured artist. It's easy to romanticize Vincent, to picture him as the quintessential suffering genius. But the truth is grittier. Vincent's struggles were real. Mental health issues, poverty, and the relentless pursuit of a vision no one else seemed to understand. His life wasn't some tragic opera. It was a daily grind against insurmountable odds. And yet, this very struggle infused his work with an intensity and authenticity that still captivates us today. Take Starry Night over the Rhone, painted during his time in Arles. It's a masterpiece that shimmers with a kind of celestial magic, but it also reflects Vincent's isolation. While the world slept, he painted the night sky ablaze with stars, a vibrant contrast to the darkness he so often felt. There's a poignant beauty in knowing that someone grappling with such turmoil could create something so luminous. Vincent's relationship with the town of Arles itself was a roller coaster. Initially, he was captivated by the Provençal light and color, convinced it would be the perfect backdrop for his artistic revolution. However, the local townsfolk weren't exactly charmed by the eccentric artist in their midst. His antics, like that infamous ear incident, didn't exactly endear him to the locals. They petitioned to have him removed from the Yellow House, fearing for their safety or maybe just their sanity. Despite these challenges, Vincent's time in Arles was a crucible for his creativity. It was here that he painted Sunflowers, a series that would later become emblematic of his work. The bright, Bold canvases reflected Vincent's fascination with color and life, even as he battled his own darkness. His sunflowers weren't just flowers. They were symbols of hope, resilience, and the fleeting nature of beauty. Now, let's bust another myth. The idea that Vincent's madness was the source of his genius. That's a romantic notion, but it doesn't hold water. Vincent's mental health struggles were a burden, not a muse. His genius lay in his ability to create despite his challenges, not because of them. It's a crucial distinction that often gets lost in the dramatic retellings of his life. In the end, Vincent van Gogh's story is one of perseverance against all odds. He painted not to please critics or to sell paintings, though that would have been a nice bonus, but because he had to. Art was his lifeline, his way of making sense of a world that often seemed incomprehensible. Each painting was a testament to his resilience, a defiance against a society that failed to recognize his brilliance. As we move towards the next chapter of Vincent's life, remember that his legacy isn't just about the art. It's about the man behind the canvas, the struggles he faced, and the undying spirit that drove him to keep creating. His story is far from over, and the lessons it holds are as relevant today as they were in his time. So buckle up, because the journey is just getting started. As Vincent packed up his easel and bid adieu to the tumultuous charm of Arles, he moved to Saint-Trémy-de-Provence in 1889, with a mind as tangled as a ball of yarn in a kitten's paws. Here, at the asylum of Saint Paul de Morsol, Vincent sought refuge from the chaos within and without. It was a place where the walls were painted in shades of hope and despair, a sanctuary for the troubled minds of the time. Vincent checked himself involuntarily, which says a lot about his self-awareness, or maybe just his exhaustion from trying to keep it all together. Let's not sugarcoat it. Life in the asylum was a mixed bag. On one hand, Vincent was given the space and time to paint, which was his version of therapy. On the other, his mental health was like a seesaw, with the lows often outnumbering the highs. He was plagued by hallucinations and episodes of paranoia, which would be enough to knock anyone off their creative perch. But Vincent, ever the resilient spirit, kept painting through the fog. Now, let's talk economics for a moment. The asylum wasn't exactly the Ritz, but Vincent's stay there wasn't cheap either. His brother Theo continued to foot the bill, which was around $3.50 francs per day, roughly $15 in today's money. Not a king's ransom, but when you're selling 0 paintings, even a modest fee can feel like climbing Everest in flip-flops. Despite the challenges, Vincent's time in Saint-Trémy was astonishingly productive. He painted around 150 canvases in the span of a year, which is a staggering output for someone grappling with mental health issues. His works from this period, like The Starry Night, Irises, and Almond Blossoms, are now considered masterpieces. But remember, back then, these were the paintings of a man trying to make sense of his own turmoil. The Starry Night is an especially poignant piece, swirling with emotion and cosmic energy. Painted from memory, its frenzied sky reflects both the beauty and chaos that Vincent saw in the world. It's an iconic work that's been analyzed more times than a Netflix algorithm, yet it never loses its magic. While today it hangs in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, back then it was just another canvas in a series of unsold works. Meanwhile, Vincent's relationship with Theo was both a blessing and a burden. Theo was Vincent's rock, his confidant, and his financial lifeline. But he was also a man with his own pressures, newly married, with a child on the way, and dealing with the stresses of the art-dealing business in Paris. Their correspondence, rich with heartfelt exchanges and artistic critique, is a testament to their bond. Yet, letters also reveal the strain of Vincent's dependency. It's not easy being both a brother and a benefactor, especially when your sibling is as mercurial as Vincent. By May 1890, Vincent moved to Auvers-sur-Oise, a quaint village north of Paris. Here, he was under the care of Dr. Paul Gachet, a physician with an interest in homeopathy and conveniently art. Dr. Gachet, with his penchant for both medical and artistic experimentation, became a friend and subject for Vincent. His Portrait of Dr. Gachet, is one of Vincent's most famous works, capturing the doctor's melancholic expression with the same intensity that Vincent brought to all his portraits. In Auvers, Vincent painted like a man possessed, completing over 70 pieces in just 70 days. It was as if he knew his time was running out, and he was racing against the clock to leave his mark. His landscapes from this period, such as Wheatfield with crows, are imbued with a haunting beauty, reflecting both his genius and his inner turmoil. Now, here's where the story takes a darker turn, and the myth starts swirling like brushstrokes in a Van Gogh sky. On July 27, 1890, Vincent was found with a gunshot wound to the chest. The circumstances of his death are as mysterious as a Lark-True mystery novel. The traditional narrative is that Vincent shot himself in a wheat field, succumbing to his injuries 2 days later. But like any good mystery, the details are murky. Some historians suggest he was shot by accident, possibly by a pair of local boys who had been teasing him. Others argue Vincent might have covered up for the boys in a final act of kindness. Whatever the truth, Vincent's last words to Theo were heartbreakingly simple. The sadness will last forever, a phrase heavy with the weight of his struggles, and perhaps a reflection of his acceptance of his own fate. Vincent died on July 29, 1890, at the age of 37, leaving behind a legacy that would only be recognized posthumously. His funeral was attended by a small group of friends and family, including Theo, who was devastated by the loss. Theo himself would pass away just 6 months later, his health deteriorating rapidly after Vincent's death. The brothers are buried side by side in overs, a testament to their unbreakable bond. In the end, Vincent van Gogh's life was a tapestry of brilliance and tragedy, woven with the threads of his unyielding passion for art. His story is one of resilience, a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. As we close this chapter, remember that Vincent's legacy is not just in the masterpieces he left behind, but in the lessons his life offers about creativity, mental health, and the enduring power of art. Stay tuned, because the story of Vincent's posthumous rise to fame is just around the corner. So picture this. Vincent van Gogh, the misunderstood genius, dies with barely a penny to his name, and a century later his paintings could buy you a small island in the Caribbean. How did we get from starving artist to auction house superstar? Well, buckle up, because this journey is full of twists, turns, and a whole lot of irony. Let's start with the immediate aftermath of Vincent's death. His brother Theo, who had been Vincent's greatest supporter, passed away just 6 months later, leaving his widow, Johanna van Gogh, to deal with Vincent's chaotic legacy. Johanna was no wallflower. She recognized the brilliance in Vincent's work and took it upon herself to promote his art. She organized exhibitions and published the brothers' correspondence, revealing the depth and complexity of Vincent's struggles and genius. Her efforts were the first step in turning Vincent from a forgotten painter into a posthumous celebrity. Talk about a sister-in-law with a mission. Fast forward to the early 20th century, when art movements like Fauvism and Expressionism began to embrace Vincent's bold use of color and emotive brushwork. Artists like Henry Matisse and Edvard Munch saw in Vincent a kindred spirit, someone who had dared to paint the world not as it was, but as it felt. Vincent's reputation began to soar, albeit slowly, until he became a symbol of the tortured genius. You know, the kind of guy who cuts off an ear and suddenly everyone wants a piece of him. By the mid-20th century, Vincent's paintings were gracing the walls of major museums and commanding prices that would have made him blush, or perhaps faint. In 1987, irises sold for a cool $53, $9 million, equivalent to around $130 million today. Just imagine Vincent's ghost watching that auction, shaking his head in disbelief while munching on some ethereal popcorn. And then, of course, there's Portrait of Dr. Gashit, which fetched $82, $5 million in 1990. It's enough to make you wonder if Vincent's life would have been different if he'd been able to cash in on his own genius. But here's the kicker. Vincent never saw a dime of this wealth. During his lifetime, he sold just one painting, The Red Vineyard, for 400 francs, peanuts compared to today's astronomical sums. It's a tale of tragic irony, the kind that would make even the most stoic historian raise an eyebrow. The art world, it seems, is a fickle beast, one that often rewards artists only after they've shuffled off this mortal coil. Vincent's posthumous fame also comes with a certain romanticization of his struggles. He's often depicted as the quintessential tortured artist, a narrative that's as appealing as it is misleading. Yes, Vincent battled mental illness and poverty, but to say these struggles were the source of his genius is to simplify a complex reality. His art was an escape, a way to channel his emotions into something tangible. It was not the madness that made the art, but the art that gave meaning to the madness. Today, Vincent's paintings are a staple of the art world, and exhibitions of his work draw crowds like moths to a flame. His vivid landscapes and haunting portraits speak to something primal in us, a desire to see the world through the eyes of someone who felt everything so deeply. Vincent's legacy is a reminder of the thin line between genius and madness, and the power of art to transcend time and circumstance. So, what do we take away from all this? Perhaps it's the idea that true genius often goes unrecognized in its own time, that the value of art isn't always measured in francs or dollars, but in its ability to touch the human soul. Vincent van Gogh's life was a testament to resilience, to the enduring power of creativity in the face of adversity. He may not have lived to see his success, but his story continues to inspire and captivate, a testament to the enduring power of art and the human spirit. In the end, Vincent's life was like one of his paintings, a whirlwind of color, emotion, and complexity. He may have struggled to find his place in the world, but in doing so, he left behind a legacy that continues to resonate. So the next time you find yourself standing in front of a Van Gogh, remember the man behind the masterpiece, the struggles that shaped him, and the art that has ensured his immortality. Because if there's one thing Vincent's story teaches us, it's that true art and true genius never dies. In the rocky hills of ancient Sparta, where life was less about lounging in togas and more about rigorous training, women carved out a paradoxical existence that would make even the most seasoned history buffs do a double take. Here's a society that handed its women power with one hand and yanked it back with the other. While their Athenian sisters were busy perfecting the art of invisibility, Spartan women were out there running the show, or at least a decent chunk of it. But before we get too carried away with visions of ancient girl power, let's pull back the curtain on the reality behind the legend. Spartan girls grew up in a world that was all about preparing for war, whether they were going to fight in it or not. Unlike their counterparts in Athens who were expected to perfect their embroidery skills, Spartan girls were encouraged to get sweaty and strong. They were enrolled in a public education system called the Agog, which was not so much a school as it was a boot camp with a curriculum that included athletics, dancing, and singing. If you're picturing a wholesome arts and crafts class, scrap that thought. We're talking about a regime that prioritized physical fitness over needlepoint, where the ability to wrestle effectively was as valuable as knowing how to weave a decent basket. Now, it's easy to romanticize this setup as a progressive utopia where women were liberated through education. But remember, this is Sparta, where even their idea of fun had a hint of military discipline. Spartan girls trained to be tough because society demanded it. They had to birth and raise the next generation of warriors who would keep the Persian Empire at bay. The state needed them to be strong, healthy, and capable of producing equally robust offspring. Talk about pressure. Let's not forget, while they enjoyed more freedoms than their fellow Greek women, Spartan women were still very much under the thumb of a patriarchal society. They could own land and even inherit wealth. About 40% of Spartan land was owned by women, a staggering figure for the time. But they operated within the framework of a system that ultimately served the state's military needs. In other words, their freedoms had strings attached, and those strings were tied to the battlefield. The ultimate goal was to produce warriors, not to foster personal autonomy. So, while they had a bit more wiggle room than the average ancient Greek woman, they weren't exactly running wild in a feminist wonderland. The public education system, or the Agog, was surprisingly ahead of its time, and it wasn't just about molding muscle-bound citizens. It included an element of public speaking and critical thinking, albeit all within the context of serving the state. This was Sparta's version of a well-rounded education, minus the Socratic debates. The ability to articulate thoughts was valued, but only if those thoughts contributed to the greater glory of Sparta. So, while you could discuss strategy and strength, don't expect any philosophical musings about the meaning of life. Unless, of course, the meaning of life was to conquer your enemies. For perspective, compare this with Athens, where girls were raised to be the epitome of domesticity. Athenian women lived largely in the shadows, managing households and producing heirs, locked away from the political life of the city. Meanwhile, Spartan women participated in public life, owned property, and were even known to speak up in public. But before you start drafting ancient slogans for women's liberation, remember that every bit of freedom Spartan women enjoyed was subject to the overarching goal of maintaining a warrior society. Their education and social roles were tools designed to serve the collective, not the individual. The Spartan approach to gender roles was practical, even if it was harsh. If the men were off fighting, someone had to manage the home front with competence and authority. This necessity granted Spartan women a level of respect and responsibility that was unheard of elsewhere in Greece. But it was a respect rooted in utility, not equality. As much as it might sting our modern sensibilities, Spartan society was less about individual rights and more about collective survival. So, in the grand tapestry of history, Spartan women are a fascinating anomaly. They walked a tightrope between freedom and subjugation, navigating a world that demanded strength and sacrifice. While they were given certain liberties, these were not an end in themselves, but a means to a militaristic end. They were the backbone of a society that was always on war footing, and if that meant being a bit more liberated than their Greek sisters, so be it. The irony of Spartan women's lives was that their empowerment was both genuine and limited, a testament to the complex dance between gender and power in one of history's most storied societies. And so, the curtain rises on the Spartan marriage market, a social scene as peculiar as it was pragmatic. Picture this: Spartan men, too busy flexing their muscles and perfecting combat formations, had little time for courtship. They weren't exactly swiping right on ancient Tinder. They were out there, fighting for glory and the survival of their city-state. This left Spartan women with an unusual degree of agency in romantic affairs. In a world where arranged marriages were the norm, Spartan women had a bit more say in choosing their partners, though let's not get carried away with ideas of romantic candlelit dinners and whispered sweet nothings. Now, why did Spartan society grant women such a rare upper hand in marital matters? It was partly practical, partly cultural. The men were often away, and the city's survival depended on a steady supply of new warriors. So, women had to be proactive in ensuring their households were well-matched and productive. It wasn't a love story for the ages, but it worked. But let's not kid ourselves. Sparta's marriage customs were no fairy tale. The wedding night was famously bizarre. The bride would have her head shaved and be dressed in a man's cloak and sandals before being left alone in a dark room. Talk about setting the mood. This strange ritual was supposed to ease the transition for men who spent their formative years exclusively in the company of other males during military training. It's enough to make you grateful for awkward first-date small talk. Beyond the peculiarities of the marriage market, Spartan women wielded considerable economic power. Remember, they owned about 40% of the land, a staggering figure that put their Athenian counterparts to shame. While Athenian women were mostly confined to the domestic sphere, Spartan women ran estates, managed finances, and even had a say in civic affairs when their husbands were off at war. It was a level of economic autonomy that was practically unheard of in other parts of Greece. But before we start applauding Sparta for its proto-feminist policies, let's delve into the reality behind the numbers. This economic freedom came with its own set of societal expectations and pressures. The land and wealth they controlled were ultimately tied to the upkeep of the military state. They weren't exactly planning lavish vacations or investing in luxury chariots. Their primary responsibility was to ensure the estates were run efficiently to support the warrior class. This economic role made Spartan women indispensable, yet their freedoms were a double-edged sword. They were respected as managers and decision-makers, but this respect was rooted in necessity, not equality. The societal fabric was woven with the threads of military dominance, and women were entrusted with their roles because Spartan men had no choice. Someone had to keep the home fires burning, literally and figuratively, while the men were off doing their best to emulate Achilles. The pressures of managing land and estates were immense. Spartan women had to be shrewd and resourceful. They couldn't afford to be anything less. Their success or failure directly impacted the city's ability to sustain its military campaigns. The stakes were high, and the margin for error was slim. They had to navigate a world where their roles were clearly defined and strictly enforced. The illusion of freedom was just that, an illusion, crafted from the necessity of a society perpetually at war. In this context, Spartan women's economic roles were less about empowerment and more about survival. The men may have been fighting on the front lines, but the women were also engaged in their own battles. They were strategists in a different kind of war, one that took place on fields of grain rather than fields of blood. They balanced the books, negotiated trade deals, and ensured the city's coffers were full enough to fund the endless cycle of training and warfare that defined Spartan life. So, in the grand scheme of things, Spartan women were pivotal. They were architects of a society that valued them for their utility, not their individuality. It's a harsh truth that underscores the complexity of their existence. While they had more autonomy than their Greek sisters, it was tethered to a system that demanded much and offered little in return. Their lives were a dance of duty and diligence, choreographed by the ever-present drumbeat of war. As we pull back from this snapshot of Spartan life, it's clear that these women walked a tightrope of privilege and pressure. Their stories are a testament to resilience in a world that demanded strength from everyone, regardless of gender. The romance of their independence is tempered by the reality of their responsibilities, reminding us that history is rarely as simple as it seems. Spartan women were a force to be reckoned with, not because they were given freedom, but because they carved out a place for themselves in a society that was anything but forgiving. As we pivot from the economic battlefield to the political arena, let's dive into that ancient rumor mill, the political clout of Spartan women. They weren't exactly casting votes or running for office, but they certainly knew how to pull the strings behind the scenes. The Spartan political system was a complex beast with 2 kings, a council of elders, and an assembly of citizens, but no formal place for women. Yet, Spartan women, especially those from elite backgrounds, found ways to make their voices heard in this male-dominated world. The myth of Spartan women wielding significant political power is tantalizing, but needs a reality check. Sure, they had influence, often through their husbands and sons, but they weren't the power brokers Hollywood sometimes suggests. Take Gogh, Queen of Sparta, for instance. If you've seen the movie 300, you might recall her as the formidable queen who delivers one-liners with more punch than a Spartan shield. In reality, Gogh's life was less about dramatic speeches and more about strategic whispers. Gogh was the daughter of King Cleomenes I and the wife of King Leonidas I, which gave her a unique insider's perspective on the politics of the day. Her famous quip, "Because we are the only women who give birth to men," wasn't just a mic-drop moment for gender equality, but a statement about the societal roles that defined Sparta. Her influence was subtle, exerted through her relationships, but make no mistake, she knew her way around the political chessboard. Her advice was sought by men in power, and her opinions could sway decisions, but always indirectly. In Spartan society, the realpolitik was a game of shadows, and women like Gogh played it with aplomb. They might not have had formal political power, but their economic control and social networks allowed them to nudge the course of events. Picture a game of telephone, where the message passed from one influential woman to another could subtly shift policy. These women were the original spin doctors, crafting narratives and influencing outcomes from the confines of their domestic spheres. The tale of the Spartan queen's power, however, is often exaggerated. While queens had status and were respected, they weren't calling the shots in the agora. The Spartan kings, despite their dual leadership structure, weren't exactly known for taking orders from their wives. Instead, Spartan women wielded a quieter form of influence, one that relied on persuasion and the strategic use of their social capital. It's easy to romanticize this behind-the-scenes power play as a proto-feminist triumph, but let's not get carried away. Spartan women were skilled operators, no doubt, but their influence was limited by the societal norms of the day. They were respected for their wisdom and valued for their insights, yet their power was always contingent on the larger goals of Spartan society, primarily to keep the war machine running smoothly. Beyond the queens and noblewomen, the average Spartan woman's political influence was even more constrained. Their lives revolved around maintaining the household and ensuring the continuation of the warrior lineage. They had a voice in family matters, and their opinions held weight in domestic contexts, but they weren't shaping policy or leading revolts. Their influence was personal, not political, and while that might seem like a distinction without a difference, in ancient Sparta, It was all about the hierarchy. Now, about Hollywood's love affair with Spartan women as warrior queens, let's just say there's a lot of creative license at work. Movies tend to amplify their roles, showing them as equal partners in the militaristic state. While it's true that Spartan women were more publicly engaged than their Greek counterparts, the idea that they wielded swords and commanded armies is more fantasy than fact. They were warriors of a different kind, battling societal expectations and leveraging their roles to subtly influence the men who did the fighting. The lure of the myth persists because it offers a tantalizing vision of empowerment, but the reality is more complex. Spartan women were influential, yes, but their power was exercised through a lens of necessity rather than equality. Their society valued their contributions for their utility, not because it sought to elevate women to equal status with men. The Spartan woman's life was a delicate balance of authority and obedience, finesse and fortitude. They navigated a world where their power was both real and limited, where they could shape outcomes, but always within the bounds of a society that placed the collective above the individual. They were architects of their destiny in a way, but always with an eye on the ever-present demands of the Spartan state. As we pull back from the political intrigue and set our sights on the next chapter of Spartan life, one thing is clear. The story of Spartan women is one of paradoxes. They were empowered yet restricted, influential yet sidelined, respected yet constrained by the very society that afforded them their unique place in history. Their tale is a testament to the complexity of gender and power, a reminder that even in a world defined by war, the quiet strength of Spartan women left an indelible mark. And so, we transition from the political chessboard to the next act in Spartan society, where the stakes were just as high and the players just as determined. Now, let's step away from the political chessboard and wade into the vibrant tapestry of cultural life in ancient Sparta. If you thought the Spartan women were all about brawn and no brain, it's time to set that record straight. Sure, they could probably outsprint most of us on a modern track, but their lives were also entwined with the rich traditions and rituals that painted the Spartan cultural landscape. First up, religious ceremonies and festivals. These were not mere diversions from the daily grind. They were essential elements of Spartan life. For women, these events were opportunities to step into the public sphere in a society that otherwise kept them on a tight leash. Picture the Hyacinthia, a 3-day festival honoring Apollo and his lover Hyacinthus, where women played a crucial role. This wasn't just about dancing around a bonfire. It was a multi-day affair involving processions, sacrifices, and feasts. Women, decked out in their festival best, participated in the rituals, embodying their connection to both the divine and the community. But let's not romanticize this as a gender equality rave. These festivals reinforced the social order. Women's participation was a nod to their importance in sustaining Spartan society, not a declaration of independence. Their roles in these rituals were well defined, serving to underline their duties rather than their freedoms. For every veil lifted during the revelry, there was another layer of societal expectation woven into their roles. Speaking of societal expectations, let's debunk the myth that Spartan women were just muscled mannequins with no room for intellectual pursuits. Far from it. While they weren't penning epic poems or philosophizing on the nature of existence a la Plato, they had their own avenues for intellectual expression. Spartan women were known for their sharp wit and eloquence, a trait that would make even the most seasoned stand-up comedian pause. They cultivated a peculiar brand of public speaking, one that involved a mix of assertiveness and brevity, much like a Twitter thread with fewer hashtags and more gravitas. Take Gogh, Queen of Sparta, and a quip about why Spartan women were the only ones who give birth to men. It wasn't just a sassy comeback, it was a reflection of their unique role in Spartan society. This kind of verbal dexterity wasn't just tolerated, it was expected. Spartan women's voices were sharp tools, honed to cut through the noise and serve the state's stern purposes. Let's not forget the literary contributions that slipped through the historical cracks. While there are no Spartan women poets whose names echo through the ages like Sappho of Lesbos, their oral traditions and storytelling were vital. They passed down legends and tales that shaped Spartan identity, weaving narratives that glorified their warrior ethos. It's a reminder that not all history is written in stone tablets. Some of it thrives in the oral traditions that outlive written records. In terms of artistic contribution, Spartan women were more patrons than creators, much like today's art collectors who can't tell a brush from a chisel. They supported local artisans and craftsmen, ensuring that the arts had a place in a society that prioritized military prowess. While they weren't sculpting statues or painting frescoes, their influence was felt in the cultural fabric of Sparta. They were the unseen patrons of the arts, ensuring that Sparta wasn't just a city of warriors, but a city with soul. Now, let's dabble in modern humor. Imagine a Spartan woman being dropped into today's world. The juxtaposition is almost too rich to resist. How would a Spartan woman react to our notions of fitness? Forget spin classes and yoga retreats. Their idea of a workout was a full-contact sport with a side of tactical maneuvers. And how about our modern concept of self-expression through fashion? Spartan women had a singular, utilitarian style. Think athleisure meets ancient Greece. Yet, for all their practical attire, they had a knack for making their presence felt without the help of designer labels. In terms of social norms, the Spartan woman of today might find herself bemused by discussions of work-life balance. In ancient Sparta, the lines between personal and public life were blurred, with every action feeding into the greater good of the state. The concept of me time would likely be as foreign to them as a Wi-Fi password. Their lives were a continuous dance of duty and discipline, a relentless rhythm that left little room for introspection or indulgence. But before we get too carried away with the Spartan woman's imagined jaunt through time, let's pull back to the reality of her world. Festivals and ceremonies offered respite, yes, but they also reinforced the collective identity that defined Spartan life. Participation in these events was less about personal expression and more about affirming one's place in the societal hierarchy. Every dance, every chant was a thread in the broader tapestry of Spartan existence, a reminder of the roles they were expected to play. As we delve deeper into the cultural life of Spartan women, it becomes clear that they were more than just support players in the grand theater of Sparta. They were active participants in a society that demanded much and gave little, their lives a complex interplay of strength and subtlety. While the myth of Spartan women as purely physical entities persists, the reality is that they were as intellectually and culturally engaged as their male counterparts, finding ways to express themselves within the constraints of their world. In the end, the cultural and social life of Spartan women is a testament to their resilience and resourcefulness. They navigated a world that valued them for their utility, yet found ways to assert their presence and influence. Whether through religious rituals or sharp-tongued repartee, they carved out a niche for themselves in a society that was anything but forgiving. As we prepare to explore the final chapters of their story, one thing is certain. The legacy of Spartan women is as enduring as it is enigmatic, a reminder that history is as much about the untold stories as it is about the legends that capture our imagination. Wow, what a journey we've been on through the winding roads of Spartan history. As we lace up for the final leg, let's dive into the legacy of Spartan women, a tale that's as layered as a baklava and just as indulgent in historical flavor. Now, don't let the romanticism of ancient cinema fool you. Spartan women weren't strutting around like ancient CEOs in sandals. Their lives were as much about sacrifice as they were about silent strength. For starters, let's tackle the elephant in the room, the idea that Spartan women were the original feminists. While they did have a sort of proto-feminist vibe, their empowerment was more about practicality than ideology. Picture a world where women held around 40% of the land, a staggering statistic when you consider that across the Greek world. The concept of women owning property was about as popular as a toga in a snowstorm. But remember, this wasn't an egalitarian utopia. It was a necessity dictated by a society always on the brink of war. These women weren't just sitting on estates, sipping wine while the men were off playing hero. They managed properties, made financial decisions, and ensured the city-state's economic stability, a Herculean task in an era without Excel spreadsheets. Their economic power was a double-edged sword, though. It gave them influence, yes, but also bound them to the relentless demands of their militaristic society. In a way, they were the original multitaskers, juggling the responsibilities of estate management with the societal expectation of birthing the next wave of Spartan warriors. Now, let's debunk another myth, the notion that Spartan women's influence was all-encompassing. They had clout, no doubt, especially in their households and among their peers. However, in the grand political arena, their influence was more whisper than raw. It's like being the person who picks the playlist at a party, not the DJ, but still holding sway over the vibe. They weren't casting votes or drafting laws, but they were shaping opinions, nudging the male decision-makers with well-timed advice. Take Gogh, for instance. Often romanticized as a queen with a sword, she was more of a strategist than a warrior. Her influence lay in her ability to navigate the corridors of power with subtlety and skill. Her legacy, like that of so many Spartan women, is a testament to the power of indirect influence, a reminder that sometimes the most potent force is the one that moves unseen. The Spartan woman's legacy, however, transcends her time. As we sift through the sands of history, we see echoes of her story in the struggles and triumphs of women across ages and cultures. Her life was a paradox of empowerment and constraint, a tale of resilience that resonates even today. The romanticized image of Spartan women as fierce, independent figures is appealing, but it glosses over the harsh realities of their existence. Sure, they had more freedom than their Greek counterparts, but this freedom was shackled to the needs of a warrior state. They were valued for their ability to contribute to the common good, not for their individual aspirations. It's a sobering reminder that history often elevates stories that fit a narrative of empowerment while glossing over the gritty details. So, what can we learn from the Spartan women of yore? Their story is one of balance, between personal autonomy and societal duty, between economic power and social expectation. It's a complex legacy that challenges simplistic narratives and invites us to look deeper. As we reflect on their place in history, let's remember that the allure of myth can sometimes overshadow the gritty reality. Their lives were a dance of duty, discipline, and yes, a certain degree of defiance. In the grand theater of history, Spartan women played their roles with a strength that was as silent as it was significant. They were the architects of their destiny, even as the scripts were written by others. Their legacy is a testament to the enduring power of resilience and the subtle art of influence, a narrative that challenges us to look beyond the legends and see the people behind the myths. As we wrap up this exploration, here's a sharp observation to chew on. History has a way of repeating itself, often in unexpected ways. The struggle for balance between personal freedom and societal duty is as old as time, echoing in the corridors of ancient Sparta and resonating in our modern world. The Spartan women remind us that the stories we tell about the past can illuminate the present, offering lessons in resilience and strength that are as relevant today as they were in their time. So, as you drift off into the embrace of sleep, let the tales of Spartan women weave into your dreams. Their lives, a rich tapestry of complexity and contradiction, offer a mirror to our own struggles and triumphs. Here's to the women of Sparta, whose legacy endures not in the swords they wielded, but in the strength of their spirit. Sleep well, with the knowledge that history is as much about the stories untold as it is about the legends that capture our imagination.